I don't have my gavel. Good afternoon. I'm going to call the General Purposes Committee meeting to order. May I have a motion on the minutes? Any errors or omissions? All those in favor, post carry. Sorry? You have a question. Councillor Wolf.
Thank you. Through your worship to staff, just if it could be done now or in upcoming email perhaps. But in the minutes, there was the Truth and Reconciliation policy, and I was just going to ask if there's any update on a timeline or what staff person we would be in contact with
I
going
think
forward.
you can ask that later.
Okay.
Okay, all those in favor? The opposed, that is carried. The award of the contract for telecommunication services. Grant, anything to add to your report?
No, your worship, I have nothing further to add. I'm happy to answer any questions.
Move the recommendation.
All right, so it's moved, and is it seconded? And you have a question. Councillor Wolf.
Thank you. Through your worship to staff, could you please comment if you're aware of the living wage status of either Rogers or TELUS?
I haven't found a definitive source where it identifies what organizations are classified as that way, but in researching TELUS, most of their salaries are well above the living wage threshold. They do have some entry-level positions that are below that threshold, but those positions also have a variable compensation component. So with such things as performance enhancements and other factors that they get on performance, they actually then do exceed that living wage threshold.
Great, thank you.
Okay.
Councillor McNulty.
Yeah, sorry, your worship, maybe my question isn't germane. Good report, I support it, and so I moved it. What about getting communications within the council chambers? We've had problems throughout the year, and we had them in the Anderson room. I'd like to go on record and say I'm requesting get together with TELUS or whoever so we can better serve the public. That's all I have to say. Thank you.
Yeah. Through your worship to Councillor McNulty. That actually is a project that's underway. It's actually not provided through TELUS. We worked with a different company. It was a capital project. It was approved for this budget year, 2021. And based on our timelines at this point, we are forecasting that we will be actually implementing the new system through the Christmas break.
Thank you very much.
Councillor Hobbs.
Thank you, through the chair. Thanks for the report. Seems pretty straightforward. Rogers doesn't actually seem to be apples to apples when you look at what they're offering. So even though they come in a little bit less, I was just curious reading it though, how does it compare in terms of increase over the term of this contract versus the other one? What are we looking at for an increase? Do you know off the top of your head roughly?
Yeah. Through your worship to Councillor Hobbs, actually we are experiencing a decrease in our contracted costs, primarily in mobility services. We're seeing about a 24% decrease of our year-over-year costs based on those. The rates have gone down fairly significantly. And so that's a good indication, right, that the industry has become very competitive. Yes, Rogers, it was not an apples and apples comparison, so it was not able to do a full comparison. And unfortunately, we fully expected the third player to also submit an award, but on the week prior, they said that they weren't able to do so. So it became a two-horse race effectively.
Oh, that's excellent news considering how uncompetitive sometimes we hear that it is in Canada for telecommunications. So thanks.
Okay.
Councillor Heed.
Thank you, Chair. Two quick questions. Is this a 5G network?
Through your worship to Councillor Heed, 5G is a network that all of the major telecoms are rolling out over a period of time. TELUS has already started their 5G rollout in Richmond as well as other districts and municipalities. It's not what I would call the true 5G network yet, though. It essentially is moving to that technology. It's very similar to what was there previously in terms of speed. When you get into what's called the high-density 5G network with microcells, that's where we start getting the benefits of it, and that's probably a good 3 to 5 years out. But these are investments that TELUS as well as other carriers are making to move to this next level.
And through the Chair, just for my interest sake, the annual sponsorship that's proposed, what's that for?
Through your worship to Councillor Heed, that really is at the discretion of the city on how they would like to direct that sponsorship fund to support any events or things that may be of interest or of priority to council.
Thank you, Chair.
Councillor Day.
Thank you very much, Mayor Brody. I was just curious why Rogers didn't bid on the wireless landline component, because that took them out of the race. Are they unaware of it, or?
Yeah, through your worship to Councillor Day, The issue really comes down to the ability of the provider to actually provide what's called that last mile of service. Rogers has not invested or does not have the investment in the in-ground infrastructure. And so essentially the cabling and the copper that goes to homes in order to provide that service for a broad perspective. And so because they could not provide the service, they were unable to bid for it.
Okay, so they were well aware. Thank you.
All right, we'll call the question then. All those in favor? Any opposed? That is carried. Thank you, Grant. Then we have the application for the liquor primary license. So that's moved. Is it seconded? Moved and seconded. Mark, anything to add to your report?
To your worship, I have nothing further to add, and I'm happy to take questions.
All right, Councillor Heed?
Mr. Cradle, thank you, and thank you, Chair. I noticed that in one instance for the recommendation that the police are consulted, but there's no comments that come through. So we're extending the liquor license to 2 a.m. in the morning. Did the police just not comment on it, or they have no concerns?
For your worship, to Councillor Heed, staff reach out to the RCMP. They provide comment, they provide a status check, and if there are any concerns, they express that to staff, and staff will put that in the report. So in both instances, no concerns were expressed, nor were there any comments.
Thank you, Chair.
Councillor Day?
Thank you very much, Mayor Brody. So I was wondering why we limit the notification area to 50 meters. That doesn't seem near far enough when you think about a business like this could impact parking and other noise and, any thought about that?
Through your worship, to Councillor Day, typically 50 meters is a radius which is used for a lot of different type of zoning applications as well. And once you get beyond the 50-meter radius, then it, particularly in dense multifamily areas, you could be looking at quite a long and cumbersome consultation process. And in this instance, I should note that on both applications, this adhered to council policy in the sense that it was beyond the 500-meter radius for schools and community centers as well.
Because like with, we've changed it with zoning reapplications, like in neighborhoods to 100 meters. So, but you're saying primarily because it was a really densely populated area, that's the number one reason?
For your worship, to Councillor Day, this is the policy that staff has adhered to in the past. 100 meters in this particular instance would probably be on the vector of any noise concerns or complaints. As noted in both of these areas are areas that do typically have a relatively high amount of noise, so it would be not really a concern in this instance. But beyond 50 meters, it could potentially be a notification that's expanded to 100, but I imagine that it'd be diminishing returns once you get beyond that.
Yeah, well, I'd like to see this reviewed in a year because that Good Co bar that's opened up in Steveston is causing a great deal of stress with people who live there, in the Steveston Harbor area. So will we be reviewing it in 1 year?
This would not be the normal practice.
Yeah, I think we should on both this one and number 3, because if issues do come up, we need to know about it, so.
All right, Councillor Hobbs.
Thank you, and through the chair. Just quickly, there's another one coming up similar, and is this part of a strategy or plan? Are we developing an entertainment district in that area? I've read a couple, but I don't think I've read any actual plan on it, so maybe I just missed it. Is that it, though?
Through your worship, to Councillor Hobbs, I would defer to one of my colleagues within the planning section. I'm not aware that this is part of a larger strategy of revitalizing or transforming this area into an entertainment district.
Okay.
All right, we'll call the question then. All those in favor? Any opposed? That is carried. And the next one is a similar one for Capson, so that's moved and seconded. Any comments on that? We'll call the question. All those in favor? Any opposed? That is carried. Soil use for the placement of the fill application. Now, just to note, has Mr. Thani come in? No? We do have two parties, Dr. Stephen Ramsey and Daniel Lemhanwa, who are available. They're the applicants, and the expert. They're available for questions, should there be any.
Move the recommendation.
So that's moved and seconded. So the idea is that we would say that all the notice and the procedural requirements are fulfilled. And as far as agricultural viability, that would go to the ALC for them to weigh in on that.
Your worship, that is correct.
Okay. Councillor Wolf.
Thank you, Your Worship. A couple questions to staff, and I do want to hear what's around the table. A few other speakers, but I will make a few points known first. So first question, would this equate to the requested amount of fill equate to about 545 dump truck loads? Is that a ballpark?
Through your worship to Councillor Wolf, roughly we'd be looking at 8,000 cubic meters divided by 7 to derive the number of dump truck loads. So I can get back to you for the exact number of dump truck loads.
Okay. Different calculation than I was using. Yeah, I didn't see, sometimes in these reports it mentions what it equals in loads, but I didn't see it. My next question is in relation to what the plan is for this area. In the staff report on page 83, it mentions that the proponent or the owner is proposing to grow blueberries. But in the consultant's report, 10 pages later, it mentions on page 93 that they plan to intend to cultivate nursery trees and vegetables in soil bottom greenhouses. So
Maybe we should ask the people who are online that question. I don't know which delegation would be answering that question, but what is the idea to grow on the renewed soil?
This is Dr. Stephen Ramsey speaking to that question. I believe that Daniel Lemhanwa can also speak to it, but I have been involved in the last couple of meetings. And this was a topic which was raised previously, and we made an absolute commitment to only cultivate blueberries. And so the scope of the project is remediation of the site or addition of soil to allow it to be effectively used exclusively for blueberry cultivation. And I think we will find that that has been recorded in the minutes of the previous discussions.
Okay, just for clarity, Dr. Ramsey, you are the consultant for this project?
I am a consultant. There's
Right.
two consultants, myself and Daniel.
Okay.
However, Daniel was not involved in
All right.
a couple of previous meetings, which I had to handle alone.
All right, go ahead.
thank you. My next question, probably to staff, the next couple, is the bond, I'm trying to put some numbers together here, so the amount of bond that they would pay, I think right now I've read it's about 38,000 of the city bond. Then there's a kind of a gift bond on top of that, pertaining that they abide by what they're saying they're gonna do. Then insure the farm plan, that's about 8,000 more. And then, like typically in situations like this, we hear that the ALC could enact their own bond on top. And I was just kind of comparing it to some previous ones that were provided in the report, so I think another 14,000. So does that sound at all accurate, like about 60,000 worth of bond?
Your worship to Councillor Wolf, that sounds roughly accurate. These bonds change based on what previous settlements were in terms of what those amounts are, but that sounds roughly accurate.
Okay, thanks. Next question I have, I think, is just two short ones here. So I know maybe this is actually to the consultant members who are here, probably most suitable. The photos that were included in your package, a lot of them have to do with the rainy season, and we were seeing lots of water, standing water and such. What about during this kind of historic drought that we've just gone through? How dry did the land get?
Once again, Dr. Stephen Ramsey here responding to that. Certainly during the recent dry period, the ground was exceptionally dry. However, we have to think of the water management on the site throughout the full 12 months. In a normal year, which is what we would expect more often, we can divide the year into two parts: an agricultural period, which is essentially April to September, and a winter period from October through to March. In every year, the winter period is very wet, as we know. And during that period, we have to manage the water level, otherwise it damages the crops. And that's perhaps something that the agrologist can speak to with more authority and knowledge. During the summer, in most cases, there is a water deficit. This is well known in agriculture, and it's one of the reasons, of course, that farmers irrigate during the summer. And if you look at my water management report, I actually, specifically address that issue of the water budget throughout the year. Certainly, the dry season this year was very concerning, but I think we have to view it as both exceptional and also it doesn't really relate to the consideration of the full year's water management.
Well, great, thank you. I just have one final question. I think I'll direct it to our staff as it relates to their report, even though it's quoting Dr. Ramsey, mentioning that there would be no adverse consequences to adjacent areas of the subject property or to adjacent properties. And in our report, it highlights that there's ESA at the back of the property. There's our, environmentally sensitive area in the back, the south. There's a riparian management area to the west. I personally am very familiar. There's right-of-way routes, and I walk these routes, and I'm very familiar with this property. And so my question to staff is, what have we done to assist? If along the west side of the property, there's that berm, which is basically a grass grown over a pipeline that's draining the Cranberry Bog, that's to the northwest of this property, and it's draining it out to the Fraser River. What have city staff done to support this farming site along this property's side of that pipeline? Have we done anything to date?
Through your worship to Councillor Wolf, I can address the first part regarding the ESA, the environmentally sensitive areas. These areas are already under farming, and they're already under development, so there'll be no impact on the ESA in terms of the riparian management areas. There will be a little bit of an increase on the soil, but for these specific questions regarding what works have been conducted by the city, I would defer to one of my colleagues from Public Works.
Please bear in mind, we're not being asked to look at the agricultural viability of this. This is a procedural matter. If this goes ahead, have the procedures been put in place to safeguard the city? So I don't think that question falls into that category.
Okay,
So,
then
next question.
Then I don't have any more questions. I'll just give my comment because it is already on the floor and I probably won't get time again. So I'm hesitant to support this going forward to the ALC. I'll wait and hear what others say. I may change my mind. But just my familiarity with the site and the lack of support for irrigation works that farmers have been asking for, I think more could be done to have supported the farming that's been attempted on the site. I'm fearful of the impact that will occur to the RMA and ESA, albeit they have been neglected and overgrown blackberry and not really supported by anybody to date. So I also, in the past, haven't been supportive of the low level of bond requirements, because during my time on council, I've only seen these go to ALC, but I've never actually seen the new farm plan come to fruition. So it's hard to imagine that with tipping fees and the mansions we've seen in the past, that we're not repeating ourselves here. Thank you.
Councillor Heed.
Thank you, Chair. My question relates to where the soil is coming from that's going to be used in this particular request. We know there's a tracking system in place for soil. The province is seriously looking at it. There are other companies that do track the soil. Although we understand the composition of the soil that's required for this particular area, are there any way other than your bylaw enforcement officers checking the loads that we're tracking where the soil is coming from?
Through your worship to Councillor Heed, If the soil, the option is to derive the soil from local sources, at which point it would be roughly $1 per meter. If it is sourced outside the city, it would be $2 per meter. The agrologist is responsible for examining that soil and sourcing it. Staff are looking at a number of options with the private sector ability to, through GPS, track the shipments down to that granular level. Right now, we rely on our qualified professionals and then a follow-up inspection from soil enforcement officers.
One quick question, follow-up. Is that under the prerogative of the ALC, or do we do it under our local bylaw?
Through your worship to Councillor Heed. So under our local bylaw, we do some inspections of soil, but we would rely on a question regarding the soil testing. We would rely on a qualified professional. As practice, we would outsource that to a specialist such as Mr. McTavish, whose company would take a look at that and do a sample of the particular matter that's in the soil to ensure there's nothing such as knotweed that could be found in that type of soil material.
Thank you.
Councillor Liu?
Thank you, Your Worship, through you to staff. I understand that this proponent or the applicant has been talked to us for quite some time because he's been complaining about the drainage from the west side, particularly on the west side. And so this process for him to apply for this has actually been on, working with agrologists and stuff, has been over a number of years that this has been going on. Is that correct?
Your worship, that is correct. To Councillor Liu, that is correct.
Okay, because I know I've gone out to the site too and talked with him and seen what his challenges are. Now, in it talks of, in the agrologist report, it talks about how they're going to peel back the peat and then put the new soil in and then put it on. Now, does this slow the process, or is this just one of the things that typically happens in any process?
Through your worship to Councillor Liu, for this type of question, I would defer to one of the qualified professionals.
This is Dr. Ramsey again. This was also an issue which was discussed in some of the previous meetings, and there was a concern raised by one of the committee members about the peat, which is obviously on the site at this time. And the response was a commitment to place the soil in a staged manner. So we wouldn't be simply placing soil over the entire site at one time and therefore covering the peat. The peat would be stripped back in sections, the fill placed, and then the peat returned to the site, or some similar sort of process. But definitely there was a recognition of the need to adapt the placement strategy in order to address those issues.
Okay, so preserving the peat is an important piece of the environmental piece here. Is that correct?
That's my understanding, but once again, in order to get a fuller and authoritative understanding of the agrological implications, you would have to speak to the Madrone consultant.
Okay, thanks. And question to staff again. My understanding is we were working on an app to track this. Now, that was with the private sector. Are we any closer to this coming to fruition, or where are we on that?
Through your worship to Councillor Liu, we held a session where we put out the word to people within the industry that this might be a service that's available. We don't have any obligations for applicants to utilize one of those services, but it is very much an exploratory effort at this moment.
Okay, but it would provide value if they were able to use such a thing, is that correct?
Through your worship to Councillor Liu, it would provide value in the sense that you'd be able to know exactly where the source of the soil is coming from and going to.
Okay, thank you.
Councillor Galanders?
Thank you, through the chair. I have a couple of comments and questions as well. Regarding the peat, actually, it was quite an extensive conversation we've been having about our procedure of stripping away the peat, because it actually doesn't preserve the peat, because when we detach the peat from the water table and place it on top, it is a fertile substance that we can amend and grow things on, but it will eventually die because it's no longer attached to the water table, so it will die, and then it'll deteriorate and the land will become lower again. So there has been a request, I believe, well, if we look at the recommendation from the FSAC on the report, it says that the FSAC, subject to the, to encourage the applicant to consider alternate soil management practices, including placing the fill on top of the existing peat, as opposed to stripping the peat away first, should it be acceptable to the ALC. And the reason we can't go forward with this right now as the way we want to do it is, we haven't explored it completely, but is that the ALC at this time wouldn't approve of that method of stripping, of placing the fill on top of the peat. And there was a referral, I believe, to ask council to write a letter to the ALC to ask them if they would explore this as an option. So I just don't know where we're at with that referral, or if it happened. It might have got lost in the shuffle.
Where was this referral and when?
To your worship, I believe this referral would have come from the Food Safety Agriculture Advisory Committee. And that referral would be at this point with the staff from planning. So I defer to one of my colleagues from planning.
Well, council, the fact is, council hasn't dealt with it. And I think Daniel Lemon wants to say something about that. Go ahead.
Yes, thank you, Mayor Brody. Appreciate the opportunity to speak. I'm the agrologist on record for this project. So with regards to the peat stripping and stockpiling and repurposing, this is considered to be standard best practice as agrologists. So this is what we typically recommend as agrologists here at Madrone. From my understanding, this is also best practice that has been supported by Mr. Bruce McTavish, who peer reviewed our report and found no concerns whatsoever regarding the plan. And also, I work quite extensively with the ALC. From my understanding, their staff agrologists also recommend such procedures. The peat will, yes, decompose to a certain degree. However, the structure of the peat will be in a state whereby water retention and nutrient retention will be facilitated. And as such, this is why we recommend the reapplication of peat. Also, we strive to repurpose materials such as soils as best we can, as to not recommend any type of procedures which would require the importation of additional topsoil, which would otherwise increase carbon emissions. So yeah, our professional practices, if it can be reused to a purpose towards facilitating agriculture, we will do at that and recommend that. Thank you.
Okay.
Now, please keep in mind, we're talking about the notice requirement, the procedural requirements. We're not talking about the agricultural viability, which will be addressed by the ALC.
Yeah, thank you. And just one more question. With regards to the riparian area, I don't remember this coming up, but so that's the riparian ditch, the water course situated along the western property line, and that's the riparian management is, farming is exempt from RMA requirements. Is that entire ditch going to be filled in? Do you know?
To your worship, through your worship to Councillor Galanders, I would defer that question to one of our qualified professionals.
Can one of the professionals talk about that?
Okay, Stephen Ramsey again here. No, there's no intention to touch the ditch at all. The ditch remains in its exactly in its current form. And in fact, the drainage system that's been designed for the area of the fill directs its drainage, the water to that ditch. And it's also important to note that because the drainage system is draining from the same area both before and after, it will be exactly the same amount of drainage. However, the rate at which it will be draining that ditch will be somewhat reduced because of the storage capacity of the additional soil.
Okay, thank you.
Councillor, no, you've got something else?
No, it's fine.
Councillor Day.
Yeah, thank you very much, Mayor Brody. So I'm a little confused about the ditch and the pipeline, because if it was done properly, would we need to bring in these, $100,000 worth of soil because I'm looking at the report on GP 106, and it says that the pipeline and associated pump were negotiated as an easement agreement with the corporation of the Township of Richmond and the Cranberry Management Consultants. And it says in 1982, Essentially, when water levels in the ditch are high, water overflows eastwards onto Mr. Thandy's property, which is at a lower elevation. I mean, we have dikes all the way around Richmond that protect us from the river. Why can't there be a dike of sorts that would protect Mr. Thandy's property from the water backing back from the ditch?
Counselor Day, we're talking about the procedure here. Agricultural viability will be the ALC.
So if we don't have the answers to the questions, we don't know about the viability. So that would then force me to vote against it, because I think that we need to have answers before we send this to the ALC.
Okay? With that, I'm going to call the question on the motion. All those in favor? Those opposed? It is carried with Councilors Day and Wolf opposed. And now we will go to the final item on the GP agenda, appointment of the acting corporate officer. Moved and seconded. Any discussion on that? All those in favor? Sorry, it's been removed. That's what it says. So, all those in favor? Any opposed? That is carried. Someone move adjournment. Okay, we're now adjourned and we'll go to the Finance Committee meeting. Just let's take a second to get reorganized here. Okay, so we'll, using our equipment here. Okay, so I will call to order the Finance Committee. May I have a motion on the minutes? Moved and seconded. Discussion on that. All those in favor, post carried. Ms. Glass.
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Mayor. Just in advance of the 4 Finance Committee reports, I did want to make a few comments. Staff across the organization have worked diligently on these reports. It has been quite a process. Staff have been challenged, particularly with any expenses that have come up through the year or any increases that have been requested. You do see some requests for additional positions. Certainly there were more than those you see in your reports. These are ones that could be supported and are in areas where they are truly needed across the organization, particularly areas where we have opportunities for increased customer service or there are social issues that are growing in our community and require addressing. The senior management team and I strongly support the recommendations made in these reports. They are responsible budgets which address the reality of a CPI that was close to 7% in reality last year, and which is projected to be almost 4% this year. You see that demonstrated in the 3.22% same level of service budget that staff is projecting and recommending. We are fortunate, due to the decisions that councils have made in the past, that a 5.88% increase, which is what staff is recommending in the operating budget, is not the same as an increase in another community, because we are, of course, starting at a lower actual dollar amount for an average homeowner. So 5.88% in Richmond is a lower dollar amount than it would be in Vancouver for an average homeowner, for instance. So I will leave our finance team under Jerry's leadership and our subject matter experts, which we have here this afternoon, to answer your questions. And we look forward to working with you on this budget in what has been a very difficult year. Thank you.
Okay, so you'll be close by in case there's any questions.
Yeah.
All right, so let's get to the library budget. We have Susan Walters here. Susan, anything to add to your report?
No, I have nothing further to add to my report, Your Worship, but I'd be happy to answer any questions that you may have.
Okay, so it's been moved and seconded. Okay, we'll go to Councillor Liu.
Thank you, through the chair. Thank you, Ms. Walters, for this information. On Finance 11, you talk about it moving from a lending to a borrowing library, and so then our transfers to and from Interlink are changing. Does this mean, are we investing less than other libraries in the region, or does this speak to something bigger?
Yeah, through your worship to Councillor Liu. So we're not investing less. We actually have a very generous capital budget for collections at our library. But what we are seeing is that Richmond Public Library has always had a popular reading library collection. We've always done a really great job of ensuring that we're buying material that our community wants, and our focus is on our local community. Other libraries are now, they're increasing their capital budgets as well, and they're changing how they spend their budgets to meet community need. So in the past, where we would have had a lot of community members from other lower mainland cities coming to borrow, we'll say, Chinese language materials from our library, those libraries in their home cities also now have strong Chinese language collections. So we're not seeing the same type of circulation and cross-municipal borrowing on certain collections that we did in the past. Our focus here at our library is to ensure that we're meeting the needs of our local community first and foremost.
Okay, thank you.
Councillor McNulty.
Yeah, thank you very much. I'm very happy to see the budget, and I only wish we could put more into the library, but because my question on the borrowing and lending was I'm wondering, through your worship, if we could get a ranking of budgets from the various libraries, so that we would have comparison, because we tend to do that in taxes. We compare ourselves to Burnaby. Well, how much they invest in the library as opposed to us, because I think we should be more.
Per capita?
Per capita and that kind of thing. I'd like to see that. And maybe overall budget as well. But my direct question to you is, you mentioned going to borrow, and we have a Chinese collection. First question I have is, are we able to expand the diversity of collections? Because I understand we have a Filipino collection, we have a number of we have a Jewish collection. What about other, given the diversity of Richmond and the Harmony program that we've got, the library is obviously a very central place, and we should be expanding in that area. Do we have that capability within this budget?
Yeah, through your worship to Councillor McNulty, we do have the capability through this budget to be able to do that. We really look at community demand when we start a collection, because we want to be able to offer a collection that can continue to grow and develop. We have in the past had some collections that remain quite small or didn't see the community use. So it's really important when we make a decision to start a collection in a specific, to meet a specific community group's needs, that we're going to be able to expand upon that. But we do have that within this budget, and we also are able to do that through the help of some of the donations that we get from community to start up programs.
Coming on that, it was, if I may, through your worship, just two questions more. In terms of revenues, you said it doesn't sound like much. You had a decrease of $32,000, but that's still, when you look at the function of the library, it's in my opinion, a significant amount and shouldn't be sneezed at. So my question is, are you able to retrieve that in some other capacity?
Through your worship to Councillor McNulty, we're looking at fund development. Our library board has formed a fund development committee, and they're looking at different ways that they will be able to generate revenue. Of course, for public libraries, through the BC Public Library Act, it's really, really important that we make our services as accessible as possible, and there are very few things that we can actually charge for. One of those things that you'll typically see at another library are room rentals. We find that we're using our space largely to present our own programs and to work with community partners on collaborative programs. But there are opportunities for us to continue to look at revenue generation, and our fund development committee, made of the library board, are really looking at different things that we can do in that area as well. And as more people start to come back in and use our libraries coming out of the pandemic, we will see certain revenue streams start to increase again, photocopier and printing, but it is not significant revenue that comes from those areas.
Okay, in terms of, I noticed on page FIN 14, you talk about using your one-time surplus for core. We actually have 4 libraries. Given our satellite libraries and what have, people don't think of it in that aspect, that we're providing services in from Hamilton to Steveston, if you wish. And I'm hoping that's enough money in order to continue to embellish those, at least the satellite. Everybody thinks Brighouse is the only one that we have. Is that significant?
Through your worship to Councillor McNulty, yes, I believe we will be able to do that.
And where's the money coming from the consultant on RFN 9? You're going to take a consultant to look at the process. I don't disagree with it, I support it, but is that coming out of your money and your surplus?
It is, it's coming out of the library surplus funding.
Okay, it's a pity, we should be paying for it.
Okay, Counselor Au.
Where is he?
Yes, Worship.
Somewhere else.
I have two questions. The first one is on FIN 11 about the revenues. It is said that the provincial grant funding remain the same. Now, I remember that the City Council as well as the Library Board have tried different means and go to different avenues to try to get federal fundings and other fundings. So, is there any hope or any light at the end of the tunnel that some more money will be coming in the future?
Through your worship to Councillor Au, there is always hope, and we are actively working towards that. The BC Public Library Partners, which consists of the BC Library Trustees Association, BCLA, which is the BC Libraries Association, the Association of BC Public Library Directors, as well as the BC Co-op, work together to advocate for increased funding for public libraries in BC. We're actively doing that. We worked together to meet with municipal councillors and provincial leaders up at UBCM in Whistler this fall. And we are looking at engaging strategic consultants to help us develop a plan for how we move forward in advocating for secure and stable funding with the provincial government moving forward.
Okay, good. Now, my second question is about the one-time surplus on FIN 14. You talk about a few initiatives to be funded by one-time surplus. My question is, some of these items are really big budget items. So this time you can use the one-time surplus, but how about in the future? I mean, would it become something built into the operating expenses so that, you know, the pressure on budgeting will be even greater in the future?
Through your worship to Councillor Au, a number of the items that we are funding through these initiatives are one-time items. And with other items that would require ongoing funding, that is something that the Library Board's Fund Development Committee is also looking at. But we do have very generous funding from City Council that allows us in our operating budget to be able to maintain a high level of service for our community.
Okay, Counselor Day.
Thank you very much, Mayor Brody. Thank you for the report. On page FIN 11, under 2023 capital budget, it states that basically $610K will be allocated for ebooks and $610K for print books. We know we get a lot more print books for the dollar than we do ebooks. So can you talk about your rationale for that?
Through your worship to Councillor Day, one of the things that we're noticing coming out of the pandemic is that in 2020, we had to go digital, we had to go online, and we already had a strong readership that was using our online services and reading ebooks and listening to e-audiobooks, but that's only increased. And so now when we look at our current circulation stats, and we are close, we are climbing back up there, we're at about 85% of our circulation that we saw pre-pandemic. And of that circulation, we are seeing that 125% of our circulation is dedicated towards digital resources, with 75% of it going to print circulation. So at this point, it's really important that we look at what the community is asking for and needing, and we ensure that we are using that money as wisely as possible to meet community need. So there is a bit of a trend right now to put more towards ebooks because we really are seeing, and e-audiobooks, we're seeing the need for that in our community, but it's not going to decrease what we're able to do in the way of print collections for our community either, because needs are shifting. There was a time when you would come and you would get a print cookbook, but many people are now looking for recipes online. So there's a little bit of a shift there, and we can reallocate that funding towards electronic books and e-audiobooks.
So I assume you'll be really following these trends so that you know where the demand is as the years go by.
Yes, we look at statistics on a monthly basis and sometimes weekly basis, depending.
You get a Ouija board and, figure out what's up. Okay, thanks for your help.
Councillor Hobbs.
Thank you, and through the chair. Well, first of all, thank you for the report. And my comment is more general. I just want to compliment you and the board on managing your way through first COVID and now, a very high inflationary period. And when I look at your budget, the base is 3.82, which is below the CPI, I think, of 3.98. And I think municipally, 4.75. So those are just like numbers. People hear them, they go out, you know, in one ear and out the other. But the point is, you've managed things very well. And then it gets up to 4.32 because you have 0.5 that's basically foisted upon you by regulations and things that are out of your control. So my point is, and these numbers will probably come up later on in the additional discussions, but I just want to say excellent job on actually managing very challenging times. And we are in a very expensive period in our history that we haven't seen for about 40 years. So to come in underneath the CPI is, I think, quite remarkable. So well done.
Okay, with that, we'll call the question then. All those in favor? Anybody opposed? That is carried. Thank you, Susan.
Thank you.
Then we get to the components of the other budgets. So first of all, we have the capital budget. Okay, Ivy Wong, Jenny Ho, anything you want to comment on, highlight, add to your report?
Through the chair, we have nothing new, nothing more to add. All the directors for each area are available to answer any questions councillors may have for any capital projects.
All right, Councillor Liu.
Through you to staff, thank you for this report. There was a lot going on it, obviously. Couple questions. FIN 105 talks about McLean Park Dog Park, and I'm just wondering, it didn't mention the addition of lights at that park. Do we have any numbers, or could we get maybe a memo or something on what it might cost to add lights to that park? And then FIN 98 talks about the increase to the building envelope for the South Arm Community Hall is going to be 1.2 million. But then later on in FIN 148, it talks about the Thompson Community Center envelope that's not going to be done is going to be 1.6 million. That seems to be a lot bigger building, or maybe an array of buildings. So I was just wondering, is the community hall a particularly difficult building, or is it just all the extra ramps and stuff that's sort of accounting for that extra?
Right, well, first of all, let's take your first question about the lights. Where was it, in McLean Park? Okay, who can answer that? Gentlemen?
Dear Worship, to Councillor Liu, typically in our neighborhood park, we do not install lights for parks. That's why in this submission, we did not include lights.
Okay.
Thank you.
Okay, and the second question about the envelope on Thompson versus South Arm?
Through the chair to Councillor Wu, the work is more extensive on the community hall. It's older, it's more deteriorated. That's why the cost difference.
Okay, is it different cladding that ends up on it too at the end of the day?
That
or
is
are we?
correct.
Okay, thanks. And then my last question is, I see the command vehicle that's been punted along for years is suddenly now not even been considered anymore. It's not even showing up on the we're not considering category. So are we no longer considering a command vehicle, or are we going to possibly bring that forward for something that could be under grant submissions or something like this? I think, you know, we've known about it for years that we had this old deteriorating moldy command vehicle for the RCMP and the fire to use and for emergency purposes. We've considered it over the years. It seemed to be a big investment, and it was one of the things that just kept getting pushed forward, but I think it's one of those things that,
Well, let's get an answer to your question. The GM wants to speak to it.
Through your worship to Councillor Liu, a couple of things. We are asking the fire chief and the police chief to jointly look at the needs as opposed to having separate command vehicles. Secondly, we're also looking to see whether there are other opportunities for external grants or even recovering money from the forfeiture side of things. So we would come forward once we have a more holistic plan for the emergency community safety vehicles as a whole.
okay, thank you. So we haven't forgotten about it, because I haven't.
We have not.
Councillor Wolf.
Thank you, Your Worship. I have three different, or two and a half. The first one's about bats in McLean Park. We actually have one of the largest bat roosting areas in the city, right nearby there. So I've little bit concerned to hear about lights, but maybe if those lights were like down at the sidewalk or at the trail level, not
There
high
is no
bright. I
plan
know.
for lights.
So I'm just responding to what I just heard, so. Anyhow, the other one I wanted to bring up, which is specifically on page FIN 151. It's the one that's not recommended for funding, and I just wanted to ask, so this is the 560,000 capital revolving cost, and I do know that 12 pages later, it is included on page 163 as funded for the following 4 years. So I just wanted to ask staff, I know there's lots of aging infrastructure needs out there. I see a lot at the playgrounds I go to, and I hear from a lot of regular users. So is it mainly to save the cost for the next year and then kind of catch up and maintain for the following years, or is it just seen as not a need at this moment? Thanks.
Through your worship to Councillor Wolf, as Serena mentioned, at the front end, this year was a very difficult year for budget. So there was a number of items that just did not make the cut based on the criteria, the scope of work, etc. This is one area that we are in the process of doing a review. So we are doing a life cycle maintenance strategy replacement program that we're hoping to bring forward to council later next year. And that will reinforce the need for this aging infrastructure replacement and the need for a stronger understanding through council, both as far as a schedule and at cost. So that's the main reason.
Wait, just to follow up on that, if I may, through your worship. So I'm assuming that's what lots of community associations are kind of waiting for. They're wanting to know when their areas of Richmond will get like the playground renewals and stuff. So that information will come as a result of the work you just described. Is that correct?
Through your worship to Councillor Wolf, that's correct. We have an inventory of our assets right now. We still have a little bit below ground to finish. And then with that, we will have a complete inventory and then a schedule of a life cycle replacement for all those assets.
Perfect, thanks so much. My last question, through your worship, different topic on transportation and bus shelters. So my question is, do any of the items in here cover the adding bus benches, bus platforms? Because throughout the city, we have some bus stations or bus stops that are basically a pole on gravel or a pole on the edge of the roadway. Could we, or are we somewhere including in here, I'm just not catching it, aiming to get a bus bench at every, I think we have 800 or so bus stops, and where possible, getting a bus shelter, because apparently it's money-making. I think Burnaby makes about $1 million a year just for advertising on their bus shelters.
Through your worship to Councillor Wolf, absolutely, there are a number of programs in here that enhance bus stops throughout the city, and we do indeed have a program that is sponsored that we do get money from for advertising on bus shelters that they build, and we also have another one that builds bus shelters that the advertising company does not see value in having advertising at. And we also have a program that upgrades bus stops from, makes them more accessible, makes them all accessible. We're at about 80% of our bus stops are accessible right now. And we're working towards 100%. So we have a program that does that as well. We do not currently have a program that puts a bench at every bus stop at this point in time. But staff's recommendation is to make them all accessible and then maybe work on something like that subsequently.
Thank you. Just to follow up then, would it be within the 5-year capital plan? So by 2027, we would reach that 100% accessible? Is that what our goal is?
Through your worship to Councillor Wolf, that's a good question. It'll be close to that. Okay. It's not far off. Like I said, we're at about 88%. I'd have to look at the details to figure that out. But we do quite a number a year, and it's probably around 5 years, certainly not more than 10.
Okay, then if I just might, one other follow-up is related to one thing you mentioned. I think you mentioned the advertising department has seen that there's not a benefit to put advertisement on bus stops. Is that could you elaborate, or could that come in a memo to us?
Through your worship to Councillor Wolf, we have an agreement with Pattison Organization to build bus shelters and then advertise on them, and we get revenue from that as well. There are some locations in the city where they don't necessarily see value in advertising, or they they don't feel there's gonna be a return on their investment, so we have programs that actually address those outside of the sponsored program.
Great, thank you.
Councillor McNulty?
Yeah, thank you very much, Your Worship, and thank you for the copious details that we've got in the report. I don't think you could be any more transparent and lay it out in any more detail, so thank you for that. I have a question. The 131.5 million is not our largest capital budget. We've had council, it's up there, but it's not with 83 projects. I'm very concerned about the question in terms of the flood protection, of where we're at, what are we gonna do? In my opinion, I appreciate the fact that you're trying to accelerate the flood protection, but it's never enough. But where are we gonna go for that? Are we gonna continue on the South Dike? Are we gonna start the West Dike? Or are we gonna do the North Dike? Where are we going? Who's got that answer? It doesn't say in the report that I can read. It says we're gonna upgrade, but it doesn't say what we're gonna do for the amount of money that we're putting forward.
Through your worship to Councillor McNulty, we do have some other projects ongoing on the South Dike, some are in the number 9 road area right now, also in the future around between number 4 road and number 5 road on the South Dike.
Are these our weak areas? What I call weak, that
These are some of
potential
our priority areas.
priority areas, okay.
Isn't that covered mostly in the utility budget?
Through your worship, some of the projects are covered off through the capital. We do have a number of grant projects and flood protection
But
projects.
it is in our budget, 20 million is recommended for flood protection, so that's why I asked the question. On it, so I appreciate that, and I'm glad to see that in terms of the replacement and what have you, because if we don't do pay-as-you-go, it's gonna cost us a lot more later, so I appreciate what we're doing, and I appreciate the question that was asked by Councillor Lulu about McLean Park, putting the dog park in there, and possible lighting, et cetera. I just had a question on our page, Fin 52, $2 million, which I agree, the top 20 collisions. My God, do we ever see crashes at the intersection? If there isn't one every, whatever. But it said in there it was, we get only 2 to 3, and it's subject to TransLink funding. I thought we had an ongoing with TransLink. That, we're sort of one of the better customers, that we work hand in hand with TransLink, and we might get the nod.
Through your worship, Councillor McNulty, absolutely. With TransLink, some of the grants we get are an allocation. Each municipality is given a certain amount of money towards some things, and some things are competitive. Most of the grants that we have, I believe, for this program, where we're doing the top 20 intersection improvements, are allocated. So it's really subject to TransLink budgeting at the end of the day.
All right, well, keep asking, please. That's good. Just a couple of other things on it, and then I want to ask, the South Arm Hall was asked, and I appreciate the answers there. Can I ask a couple questions why things were not put in? Between 4 Road and 5 Road on Williams, and between 3 Road and Gilbert on Williams, it's like a bump all the way. When are we gonna do something on that, and why wasn't that not included in there? To me, that's a priority.
Who can address that?
Through your worship to Councillor McNulty, Williams Road between 3 and Gilbert, right now that is in the interim stage. There was a water main project that was constructed there, so that final paving will be redone when the weather improves in the springtime. For Williams between 4 and 5 Road, that becomes a matter of funding, similar to some of the other projects that did not make the list. There's just a lot of other projects that is competing against for funding out of the general revenue.
But wasn't there any money paid by developers? I mean, a number of those were one lot into 2, and then we do the hookup, or whatever we do. And would any money not have come from development?
Through your worship to Councillor McNulty, the money from development would cover repairing the trenches. Unfortunately, in that stretch, it's really the underlying substructure that's the problem. It's not just the surface layer of asphalt that's the issue there.
All right, you know better. A question on the Britannia shipyards, the St. Loft, et cetera, and the program there, a $5 million bill. Oh, sorry, page, Fin 101. When are we gonna start it and how are we gonna do it? And I assume it's limited there and not the St. Loft.
The chair to Councilor McNulty, should council approve this project, we will start immediately to start designing and implementing this project.
Because it's a fairly good tourist attraction, is it not? A lot of people come down there, at least I see them down there when I'm there. And it should be something we should be doing. So we're gonna start a meeting. Okay, thank you. And I'm sure other questions will be covered. Just, if I can find it here. Okay, on our page, okay, these are the 158, 159, and 160. I started that. These are the projects, correct me, through you to Ivy and Wyndham. These are the projects that we want to see happen, correct?
Yes.
And start some of them at various stages.
Through your worship to Councillor McNulty, yeah, that's correct.
Sort of this is the bread and butter, if you wish, or the meat and potatoes of the budget above ground.
For future budget, yes.
And for the future budget, if we should pass this. So really, we need to be looking at doing it. The other question I had, on Fin 162, there was insufficient funding. It was an oval question, but my question is, I saw it here, why wouldn't the oval take some of its funding and put it forward to do some of these things? They do have a surplus in the capital. I know some of their monies are putting away from replacing the oval, but I'm just kind of curious.
Through the chair to Councilor McNulty, the agreement between the city and the Oval dictates that the city do the major maintenance and big replacements for the Oval. The normal day-to-day maintenance and other items for flooring and so on, the Oval do from their funding and from their surplus, but the larger items as HVAC and exterior and envelope is part of the city's responsibility.
All right, thank you very much, Your Worship. I'll ask some other questions later.
Okay. Councillor Hobbs.
Thank you, and through the chair. Well, first to staff, thank you for the report. As has been mentioned, it's very thorough and very detailed and lots of reading pleasure time. So just to mention a couple large numbers for, the public. It was mentioned 131.5 million, 117.8 of that is going to, towards, I think it says 83 capital projects. And I'm very happy to see 20 million going towards flood protection. So that's excellent. Just one question to start off. The OBI mentioned on Fin 17, which is I think page 3 of the report, and it's 382,771, which is a large portion of the OBI there. And it's related to IT, hardware, and software. Can you just explain a little bit about what that is about? I understand it might have to do with licensing, and a follow-up question to that is that something that we're going to see accelerate over time and become a larger part of the budget impact?
Through your worship to Councillor Hobbs, the OPI costs expressed in this budget is really an indication of a trend. We're finding vendors are moving as they deliver software now through the cloud. They're moving from what was known as a perpetual model, where you buy a license and then you pay an annual fee to get maintenance support and upgrade rights. Essentially, the capital cost of buying licenses is now being eliminated in favor of subscribing to software. And so effectively, you don't have that one-time cost in regards to license acquisition, but you have an ongoing yearly cost in terms of subscribing to the software. So the OBI figures we've expressed here are essentially for initiatives where the vendors are now providing that service through the cloud effectively.
Right. So obviously, it's a way to enhance their revenue. So is there any offset to us in terms of money saved, in terms of services they provide for upkeep and software upkeep, that kind of thing?
Through your worship to Councillor Hobbs, there's no direct savings. I mean, there are direct savings in the context of reduced activity, in context of having to continuously upgrade software on our perspective, where the vendor's doing that on our behalf. Regardless, it still takes a lot of resources of city staff in order to test these upgrades. And so as you have new implementations of software, you have to ensure that all of our functionality, our processes continue to operate as we expect them to. So there generally always is a fairly good testing cycle with any upgrade, regardless of how it's activated.
Okay, well, thank you for that. Just a couple other points through the chair. One other question I had was about the tanker. I think it's F21, page 7 of the report, the fuel tanker for emergency services. And that sounds like a really good idea. I just wondered, is there an interoperability to that? I mean, can it be used for other things in between, potential natural disasters or disasters of another kind? And that is a truck combined with tanker, right? It's not a trailer tanker.
Through the chair to Councillor Hobbs, this is a large unit that would look a little bit like the flusher truck, if you've seen the flusher truck, a big tank. And the intent of that is not just to be available in emergencies, but we would actually use it on a regular basis to fuel ourselves, the generators at any of our pump stations. So it would get, it also used to fuel the generator here at City Hall, so it would get used regularly as well, instead of hiring that under contract.
No, it's a good idea. I do support it fully because, in an emergency, contractors are going to be busy and otherwise occupied. So it'll be good to have that resource on hand for Richmond. So thank you very much. And I just wanted to ask one other question, Your Worship, about the debt. I think it's to do with Steveston. And it's on page, I think, 20, one of the bar graphs. Figure 3 on page 23. And when I look at 2021 and I look at the debt for 2021, it's a big chunk. And I just wondered what that was in relation to. And I just wondered, there doesn't seem to be another debt showing up in 2019 or 2020. And I thought we did have a debt, one related to, for instance, the Center for Active Living. And I just wondered why that wasn't there. Or is it combined in that 1 year? The purple color.
Through the worship to Councillor Hobbs, the debt in 2020 related to Steveston Community Center capital project.
Okay, all right. Okay, there was no other debt in the previous 2 or 3 years?
That's when it's incurred, right?
Yes, not the repayment.
Okay, all right. Thank you very much.
So that other debt would have shown up in 2012 or 14 or something.
Oh, all right. That makes sense. Thank you.
I'll go to Councillor Au. Jack?
Your Worship, thank you. I support the recommendation of staff, but I have one specific question and one general question. The specific question is on FIN 151. This is an item not recommended by staff. However, I wonder if some of those issues might be related to safety. For example, the repairs on the playground, or the other ones, the lighting replacement. Are those not safety related? If they are, should we do it sooner than later?
Through your worship to Councillor Au, this account ultimately is a reactionary account, so we ultimately will address issues as they arise. In this particular case, if we're not funded for this, we'll dip into our operating budgets to support it.
If a safety issue arose.
Yes.
Okay, my second question is of a more general nature. Now, I noticed that, we use our reserve for this kind of projects. However, I think the inflation has eaten up a big chunk of our reserves. So in this case, is it not wiser for us to speed up some of the projects that we delayed for the future? Better do it now instead of letting the inflation eat up our reserve, and then it would even cost more in the future to do the same thing. So, I just want to have some thoughts from staff. Should we do some of these projects faster than, sooner than later?
Jerry, can you help us out with that one?
Through the chair to Councillor Au, there's always a balance on whether you can advance something. However, the
capital review team and staff have prioritized what is a priority. So even though it could be a cost saving to do something right now, there's other items that require immediate repairs and immediate replacement. So there's always a cost benefit.
Okay. Councillor Day.
Thank you very much, Mayor Brody. So to Mr. Chong, I had emailed you earlier to ask you if we wanted to bring this down by 1%, what would we have to save? And you said that $2.68 million would equal 1% tax.
Aren't you on the operating budget?
Yeah, but no.
We're on the capital budget.
Yeah, but doesn't it work as also with the capital budget? The same dollar amounts?
Through your worship to Councillor Day, that is correct. It's 2.68 million, and I believe part of my answer was that funds the capital building infrastructure reserve, which is their funding source for facilities. If you go to your FIN 158, 159, the next 4 years there's $119 million of projects, and it's important that we have that reserve in place to fund these projects. And also some of the aging facilities that are...
I'm going to stop you. We'll talk about that 1% to the reserves when we get to the operating budget, okay?
Okay, well, I just wanted to clarify that if we're going to bring taxes down, the only way to do that is to bring costs down, and that's the math. 2.6 equals 1%. Okay, so I had some notes here. I'm a little concerned about the bike paths, the multi-use bike paths on Steveston Highway. On page, I have it highlighted here, FIN 50, we come in at just under $6 million. And then in our Public Works and Transportation Committee meeting, that takes us from, on Steveston Highway, from number 2 road to railway. So number 2 to railway. And we had another part of that go from number 2 road to Mortfield Gate, which is not in this budget, but it was in the Public Works and Transportation. That's another $6 million. So to go from Mortfield Gate to railway, it's gonna cost us $12 million. And I wonder if there isn't a way to trim that cost.
Through your worship, Councillor Day, absolutely, there are ways to trim that cost, but it would mean making a project that is smaller than what it is right now. Our direction from council previously had been to, when creating bike routes on arterial roadways, to make them separated and to make them safer for the cyclists. And that's what this does. If we did a painted bike lane or something like that, it would probably be 1/10 of the cost, maybe less. But making that separation, the curbs, the gutters, the drainage, the lighting, everything like that adds up to this cost.
So really, if it wasn't on Steveston Highway, we could potentially do it considerably cheaper, couldn't we?
Through your worship, Councillor Day, we do a number of smaller bike routes on local roadways and things like that, absolutely. But we also do some on major roadways. One of the reasons this one is actually on Steveston Highway is we get a substantial amount of the funding, about 50% from TransLink. If we put it somewhere else, we would not. This has been identified by the region as a regional, part of the regional bike network, which is why it's on Steveston Highway.
Okay, just dollars just blow my mind. Okay, then the other one I wanted to ask about was, we have some really rich budgets here. For instance, land purchases, which is on FIN 114, is another $10 million. And I know that we want to buy, key properties, when they become available. But what is the chances we'd actually spend that money? Like, do you think that some of that could roll back into the budget?
Through the chair to Councillor Day, this just gives the staff the authority to spend the money. It doesn't mean that they can spend it without going through council with the actual cost of any project. So if it's not used, it will go back to the regional funding.
But that doesn't help the tax increase this here, does it?
Just a minute.
This,
I want you to go over the funding sources for the capital budget. How much is being put directly on the taxpayer?
how much is it?
Maybe I can help answer. On the industrial use reserve, actually a lot of this, the funding for that reserve is through rents. So it's not that much funded through the actual tax increase.
Okay.
The actual tax increase that funds it, and it's a combination, is only 500,000. The rest of it comes from rents, rental revenues.
No, just a minute. We're talking generally about the capital budget, not just that one item.
Yeah, I was just addressing her on the industrial use, but
No, but I'm talking about generally. Because the supposition for that question and previous questions has been that the capital budget is coming directly out of the taxpayer's pocket. And I want you to address that, to tell us what are the funding sources in general for the capital budget?
through your worship to Councillor Day, the funding for the capital budget comes from city reserves, it comes from grants, and it comes from DCCs. The previous project you referred to on the multi-use pathway is a combination of roads DCC and TransLink grants. So and there's a little bit of city funding through the assist factor. But there's a lot of DCC funding in this budget. So if you go to your FIN 36, $20 million is funded from developer cost charges, 1.2 million contribution from the city.
So it's a different silo, really, is what you're saying, that while the capital budget affects the tax increases, it isn't like all coming from taxpayers, like through an increase. It's coming from the silos that those monies come from.
It's because your operating budget, the transfer to reserves is set. The only thing we're asking for in this year's budget is the annual 1% increase. And that's to fund the capital buildings and facilities, because that's something that we typically don't get grants and we can't fund it from developer cost charges.
And we will talk about that later.
Okay, and then last question was, on page FIN 84, we have contractors and consultants who help us with design work. And at $2.6 million, isn't it possible to do more of that in-house rather than farming it out?
To the chair, to Councillor Day, most of these projects are quite specialized, where the consultants would need specific training on very specialized projects. So financially and technically, it doesn't make sense to have these large teams in-house for these single projects.
So it's potential that the 2.6 million that we spend could save us considerable amount then because of that expertise?
Yes, and some of this is done in-house as well. So what we can do in-house, we do design in-house.
Well, that's good to know. Thank you.
Councillor Gillanders.
Thank you, Mayor Brody. Yeah, this is a very impressive budget, and I love the way it's laid out and all the information. It's my first budget, so it's a bit of a learning curve. Yeah, just so thanks for all the work on this. One thing just jumped out at me over in the parks program. Well, just the Steveston Community Park Playground expansion being 2.2 million.
What page?
Oh, sorry, FIN 31. It's not specific to the Steveston Community Park Playground expansion, but just seeing the number of the 2.2 million for that playground compared to all the other parks. And we just got information that the South Arm Community Center Park is being rebuilt with the Community Association funds, which is pretty cool. So when I saw this number, it just made me think, is the parks program including all of our sports fields and equipment and stuff that goes to the sports? Because I know that the baseball diamonds that we've got need a lot of work. Like Brighouse Park needs to get up to being a functional field again. And Gibbons Park also needs some work, just compared to some other cities and what they've got going at their parks. So I just didn't know if that comes out of a different budget than this Parks Program one.
Through the chair to Councillor Galanders, the budget for Steveston Playground was very specialized. It's really for that playground. It's gone through a series of community public engagement, et cetera, identify the needs also.
I saw that with the accessibility requirements and stuff, which is great.
The other facilities and amenities, sports, et cetera, that you've mentioned, they will come later as specialized at individual projects. And in community services, we're also working on a needs assessment on sports amenity. So once that is done, that will inform us the priorities and order of these amenities in the future.
Thank you.
So if you look to page 96 of the report, it's FIN 110. It gives you the greater detail to answer some of the questions that are on your mind.
The 96?
Page 96 of the report, it's FIN
Oh, the
110.
report. Yeah. Okay, thank you. And then I also, the Steveston multi-use pathway also caught my attention. And I apologize that I wasn't paying attention when this got put through a few years ago, because I just always thought that Williams would be our main bike route. And I just didn't think we would ever have a major bike path on Steveston Highway, just because it's such a busy road. And I just think it would be terrifying to ride on there. But I mean, being a separated bike lane is super important. I really agree with those. I just couldn't help but think that it would be better to be on Williams, as we already have that as a dedicated bike road. But seeing that this is going to get funding that we wouldn't get if it was on Williams, I can understand why we're pursuing it. But even with the funding, I personally don't even know if we would have really wanted it on Steveston Highway, but the previous council did. So I respect that. And I guess if we don't get the funding, then we'll revisit it. So that's good. And then I just want to make one comment about the LED on FIN 51, the LED replacements throughout the city, throughout the neighborhoods. I don't know if anybody else has experienced the light bulbs changing in their neighborhood, but sometimes they can be really, really, really bright, the new LED bulbs. And mine in front of my house was replaced with a 75-watt bulb, and it was just like the whole street was so lit up. It was, and I have bats in my backyard too, so I wanted that changed. And thankfully, the city got BC Hydro to swap it out with the 40-watt bulb. And I understand that we want the 37-watt, 3,000 Kelvin warmth light bulbs. I just want to make sure that we're going to continue with that with no more than 40 watts in the neighborhoods. It'd probably cost more to have to go back and keep replacing them and switching them as people complain. So, because my new bulb is great, so that's really good. It's going to save us money in the long run and energy. And I think that's probably all I've got for the capital budget.
Councillor Heed.
Chair, for reference, FIN 27, and it's the financial impact, and I may have missed this, but maybe someone could clarify with me. We're talking about the capital budget here. We're also looking at the associated operating budget of $382,000 for going forward. I just want to know what the percentage of the tax increase for 2023 is applied to capital programs. Mary, you asked a question. I'm not sure I got the answer.
Your Worship, to Councillor Heed, the increase will be 1%, which is the transfer to reserve. That is the impact on the 2023 operating budget for capital.
Through your worship, but we had a conversation with respect to that transferring of the reserve. We're going to re-look at that, I guess, in the operating budget.
That's correct.
Thank you.
Okay, let's see now. So we need to get a motion on the floor. Moved and seconded. Any further discussion on that? We'll call a question then. All those in favor? Any opposed? That is carried. Moving along to the one-time expenditures. Yes?
Your worship, we have nothing to add to the report. Happy to answer any questions that the finance committee has.
All right, Councillor Wolf.
Thank you, Your Worship. Just referring to the table attachment 1 on FIN 173 of the 6 items recommended. Yeah, I support all of them. I just have a question about the last one. It's called City Center Tree Replacement, and obviously I care a lot more about trees than many. So I don't know about these specific trees. I don't know if we've received a memo or a map or anything. Could you speak at all specifically about these trees? And I know many people in the public were pleased when we do plant big trees, but maybe we can get plant the future ones in a way that we won't have to remove them and shock the community when we're doing this.
Through your worship to Councillor Wolf. So the background on these trees is they were planted in the mid-90s. And so at this time in their lifespan, they are reaching end of life. In the last 5-6 years, we've had significant dry periods through the summer that are trending to be warmer and drier than typically. So these trees have been in a state of decline for the last 6 years. And there's a total of 34 trees, mostly on Saba, some on Westminster Highway, a couple on the intersection of Westminster and number 3 that are dead or significantly dying back. And so to address your question about the replacement of trees, staff would certainly choose trees that are better adapted to the hotter and drier summers that we were experiencing.
Thank you. And then just to follow up with the cost associated with this, it's quite high. I'm assuming the cost is more than just getting the tree out and away, but actually repairing the damage from removing the roots and the stumps and all that, and maybe having to do, is built into this price, perhaps dealing with some of the underground utility repair?
Through your worship to Councillor Wolf, absolutely. Typically when we remove trees, we use a stump grinder, which is relatively inexpensive and quick. But due to the presence of underground utilities, we have to use a hydro excavation truck. In a normal year, we would use a piece of equipment like that 5 times, but in all 34 cases, we need to use that piece of equipment. So the most substantial component in the cost of this project is in fact the use of that piece of equipment. But of course, the pricing of this work does include the replacement of soil and trees.
Okay, thank you very much.
Councillor Day.
Thank you very much, Mayor Brody. So again, on page FIN 173, number 2 is the recreation fee subsidy program. The idea was to encourage people to use the community centers when they become seniors. And it says that the eligibility for seniors pricing is revisited as directed by council. This was delayed because of that. So what is the age that a senior can get that discount at the community centers?
Thank you, Mayor Brody. Through the chair to Councillor Day, the current age for seniors in our facilities is 50 years and over. This is in relation to the recreation fee subsidy program, and this is open to people of all ages within the community if they are meet the requirements of someone who is low income.
Okay, good. I thought this was to do with the seniors only program, so, okay, good. Thank you for clearing that up.
Councillor McNulty.
Thank you. I just wanted to follow up on that, and I have no problem with the 6 that are on the floor. At what age, there's no standing referral, at what age would we offer free facilities to a senior? I think there's a referral in there, and it was done at Parks and Rec within, I think, the last year, 14 months by myself. 86, 90, whatever, where you get free facilities?
Through the chair to Councillor McNulty, that referral is outstanding and will be coming back in 2023 with a recommendation regarding the fee subsidy policy. Right now, the age subsidy for seniors is 50 years and up.
Okay, does this subsidy include new immigrants, refugees, et cetera, the Afghans and the Iranians, the Ukrainians, et cetera, to be able to utilize this program and maybe get a day pass or something to the swimming pool or whatever? Would this do that?
Through your worship to Councillor McNulty, yes, we have been looking at how immigrants are getting access to the recreation fee subsidy program, particularly the special interest groups that are having some more challenges. So staff have been reviewing that and putting some plans in place. And as well, making sure that we get the information promoted through all of our immigrant serving agencies, so that those that are living in Richmond are aware of the program and can access it.
I think, and thank you for that, because I think that's a need for the person here, whoever it will be, because I'm not sure whether the general public realize just how many immigrants we have from war-torn Ukraine, from Iran, et cetera, that are here. There is a significant number, and they're pent up in hotels and stuff like that. And they can't qualify as citizens because they can't work, they haven't got jobs, et cetera. So I think this is important, Your Worship, to put on the record this time to hopefully support this particular position. Thank you. The other question I had, just quickly, and I'd like Jerry to explain it if I could. You know, we kept talking about the rate stabilization. You know, it's been our godsend from previous councils setting this up and bringing us along, and we kept going back to it and back to it. No matter whether you've supported the budget or not, but we've had an opportunity to utilize it. It just didn't happen. And could you explain where the money comes from, and if it's going down, how we can add to keep it up there?
Through your worship to Councillor McNulty, it was years ago, I can't remember the exact year, but council established a rate stabilization account, similar to the utility, where you have to reduce some of the fluctuations on the budget increases, and also to fund items that might not have dedicated funding. So these one-time items such as this. And typically what happens is the rate stabilization, the annual surplus, any operating surplus is deposited in this account. And then it won't be finalized until after the fiscal year the city is completed.
Bill, thank you very much. Thank you.
So just while you're here, the rate stabilization, the suggestion is we are using the one-time expenditures, we'll use the rate stabilization. We're also using rate stabilization when we get to the operating budget to reduce the amount of tax increase.
Yes, that's
and so basically, if you look at it in a certain way, we're using tax dollars that were surplus from previous years. We're using it to reduce the amount of taxes this year. Otherwise, we would have had to put the one-time expenditures right onto the tax draw, bringing it up by another percent or two. And also, we wouldn't have been able to take the operating budget and reduce the tax draw directly.
The chair is correct, and it's a more transparent way that council wanted to show the taxpayers of Richmond that the money isn't being frivolously spent. It's going back towards projects and towards reducing taxes.
All right. Councillor Hobbs, then Councillor Al. Councillor Hobbs.
Thank you, and through the chair. Yeah, just on the rate stabilization account, I don't have a question. I don't think Jerry, I'm just going to make a comment. I do really appreciate this section of the report because it's a really smart use of funds for a one-time purpose. And as the mayor just explained, it means that we don't have to increase taxes by X amount. Now, it appears that the rate stabilization fund balance as of some time recently was about 13 million, I think. And The one question I have, I think for you would be, just over the last 5 years or so, kind of for public information, but me too, what is the average that would be carrying over in that? And is it always in the neighborhood of kind of 30? I know it would go up and down, but do you have an answer for that?
Through your worship to Councillor Hobbs, it all depends on what occurs with our actual expenditures and the budget every year. So some years we might, like in the pandemic year, because we had vacancies, we might have had a bit more.
Mm-hmm.
And then other years when we have, there might be less revenues or there might be more expenditures, there'll be less. So it's hard to predict.
Okay.
From year to year.
Well, I will just say I really do appreciate the use of it for one-time expenses, but I think in a more general sense, it also illustrates the importance of reserves in general for specific purposes as well, whether it's for capital projects or for a specific purpose. So thank you very much for this portion.
Yeah, I'll just comment just make a note. One of the refrains that we constantly hear from the general public is, you're overtaxing us because you've got all this surplus. So the answer to that, at least in part, is just what we're doing. It goes to rate stabilization. It goes directly to reduce the amount of taxes that the public has to pay. So we will go to Councillor Au.
Your worship, I don't have questions on the recommended items, but I have questions on those items not recommended. For example, for item 1, not recommended, the need assessment for performing arts facility. I see that this is only a very small amount, and we know that we have the need for a bigger and a newer facility for performing. And yeah, I'm happy that we passed the gateway upgrade project. However, I think in the long run, we need something newer, bigger. And I think we have a golden opportunity with the Lansdowne development. So I want to ask staff, why don't we do it now, spend this $70,000 and get things moving?
Maybe I'll try to answer that through the chair to Councillor Au. One of the things that staff will be coming back with is looking at all facilities. So I think it was decided that it'd be hard to recommend something when we don't know what is going to be coming down the road. So this will be something that we would save for the future.
Councillor Au?
Well, again, that goes back to what I said earlier. Sooner or later, we have to spend that money. So if we spend it now and at a lower cost, actually, we might have, some kind of saving in the future. But anyway, I have more concerns about item 4 and 5. I think that should be the way to go. If we want us to become a smart city, I think we have to go more and more into, digital and online services. So again, for number 4 and 5, those are e-building for dog license and also purchasing parking permits online. Again, why don't we go for it? I understand that there's some small OPI, but again, in the long run, we have to go down that path.
Through your worship to Councillor Au, they are worthy projects, but right now staff are really concentrating on the permit project. We've just completed and we're still finalizing the business license projects. So we're trying to look at the bigger magnitude items. Once we're successful with implementing those, we'll come back and look at these 2 items.
So my understanding is that if we go ahead with this project, these 2 projects right now, there's no tax impact for this year. Right? I think I'm right.
Well, there's no tax impact because we're taking the money out of savings.
So I'll move that we fund number 4 and 5.
Okay, well, we'll let you do that, but I want to get the main motion on the floor. So let's have the motion as recommended.
What are we talking about now?
Yeah, the main motion for one-time expenditures. So that's, okay, so that's moved and seconded. And Councillor Howe, you want to move an amendment to add in a couple items?
Yes, I move an amendment to add item 4 and 5 on Fin 174.
Is that seconded?
Can we look at it first, sorry? See what he's saying.
Page 173. Is it seconded?
So we're on 5.
Is it seconded? It is not seconded. Okay, it's been seconded. I'm going to call the question, oh, sorry, Councillor Hobbs on the amendment?
Yeah, thank you.
Go ahead.
Through the chair. Yeah, I won't be supporting it. There are a number of things in the budget that aren't recommended in previous sections that we've talked about. And I understand that it's a really difficult decision for people to go through and prioritize things. And I think what we're looking at this year is significant enough in terms of an increase in taxes. And I won't be voting to add anything onto it unless somebody can come up with an offsetting cost to take away. So I won't be supporting this. Thank you.
Okay, Councillor Wolf.
Thank you, Your Worship. Just a quick question. Just so that some of these are not lost, how do we keep track, or is it just staff that keeps track of what was not recommended one year so that it either may be a recommended one the next year? How do we prioritize it?
What is the process for continuing it to next year and the year after?
Through the chair to Councillor Wolf, if a project is not recommended this year, the staff can bring that forward for next year's project as one time.
Thank you. I won't be supporting it at this time. Thanks.
Councillor Day.
Yeah, I'm looking at item 4, which is dog license e-bills. It's going to cost $41,000, and we're going to save $1,650 in postage, so I can't support that one. Sure, there's going to be less errors, but I don't think we can justify the expense. The next one is parking permit customer portal. It's going to cost $80,000, and I think that's just far too much to make things a little more convenient for people. We have great staff here. They work really, really quickly, and I don't think that we can support these two initiatives. I think down the road, who knows, maybe the price will come down with technology, but I can't support it. Thanks.
All right, I'll call the question then on the amendment. All those in favor? I see Councillor Au. Those opposed? Okay, so that is defeated with Councillor Au having been in favor. So on the main motion, which is a staff recommendation, all those in favor? Any opposed? That is carried. That brings us to the operating budget. So to staff, so as we're going through this, there will obviously be lots of questions. So in the end, what I'll suggest we do is what we just did with the last one, in fact, all of them, is get the recommendation on the floor, and then anybody who wants to amend it can make a motion to amend. But, well, no, just a minute. Let's get the discussion first, then we'll go to a motion, okay? So, to staff, what do you want to tell us about this?
Through your worship, there's nothing more to add, but I will reiterate what Ms. Luss said, that it is a challenging budget. And the city is also not immune to the economic impacts that are out there. So the costs that are incurred by suppliers, contractors, that's passed on to the city. Through the CAO and senior management, we did not accept any increases unless it was in a contract or there was some type of verifiable proof. So the same level of service at 3.22% is quite an achievement, given that some of the costs that we're seeing out there. That includes some of the external agencies such as ECOM, the RCMP, some of the senior government downloading through CPP increases, the mandatory sick pay. So I would just leave it at that and just, reiterate what we've discussed about bringing down the same level of service to 3.22.
All right, you've got three options which are on Fin 200. And this is staff's recommendation as to the options we should consider, with the recommendation being option 2. Option 3 would have more OBI phase-in from Steveston, and I take it that what you're saying is that we don't need that phase-in just yet. We can get away without it this year.
Yes, Your Worship, that's correct. We think we can do it over a 4-year period for Steveston, timing it when it opens.
Okay.
Close the opening.
So we'll go to questions. Councillor McNulty.
Yeah, thank you, Worship. Later, I'd like to add a small item for point 1 after, if I may.
You want to tell us about it?
I'd like to add on page 238, I'd like to add community services increasing the hours at Steveston Outdoor Pool. We put it in last year. We had the money. We said we had the money. Well, our seniors and a fair number of people in Steveston to come in and continue the fitness from May to September, and it's a $26,000 issue.
Okay,
Page
so
238.
So do you want to discuss that now, or just after you've made your motion to amend?
I'll move, we put it in.
Well, no, nothing is on the
Well,
floor
I'll
yet. So
discuss
just
it.
tell us about it and ask any questions
It
of
was put in
staff.
last year. I made the recommendation through Parks and Rec. We had delegations wanting lane swimming in Steveston. And I'm actually, to be saying, I'm very disappointed this wasn't included in the regular budget, because I was told we could have it in the regular budget. And it's a $26,000 item, which allows the extended hours so that not only can the swim clubs use it, but the general public can use it, and involves a fair number of seniors. We tend to be keeping, as I asked earlier about the age for free facilities for seniors, we tend to be cutting back on those that have paid their taxes for 40, 50 years and taking services away from them and putting them elsewhere. And I think this is one that I think for those that know about the pool, it's a very vibrant pool. And if we're going to keep it vibrant, we need to have activity in it all the time. And it's got to be built on, and things that were promised were not delivered in terms of promoting the pool. And I would hope that council members would support it.
I know it's a very small item in the context of the whole budget, but is there someone here who can tell us why that wasn't included? I mean, you've got 6 items there at the end. Additional levels were not recommended. Is there someone that can talk about that and tell us why it was not included? Ms. Ayers?
Mayor, as was previously explained, it was a tough budget year. We did need to make some tough budget decisions. And as a team, this one was not ranked as high as the other ones that are on the list for consideration.
All right, well, we'll come back to you on that amendment.
I'm not finished.
Go ahead.
Okay. Yeah, Your Worship, I'm not going to ask specific questions. We make some general comments, if I may. I'm gonna support the budget. I mentioned earlier, we couldn't be any more transparent in terms of the budget, and it's laid out in tremendous detail. And it meets the needs and the goals of our city, and it keeps us safe, it keeps us vibrant, it keeps us economically viable, and it keeps us growing. Where everybody wants to cut, the easiest thing in the world is to cut. But it's just like in tough times. If you're going to beat inflation, then you need to spend. You need to go out there. You need to keep the economy going. And cutting back and hibernating does not help things in that. I don't want to pay any more taxes than anybody else in the city. And then I don't want anybody else to have taxes. 5.88 is $115 increased taxes on $1.1 million home, which is a very expensive home. And it's 31 cents a day on it. But I'm a taxpayer and I don't like it. However, I do want the amenities and the services that Richmond has achieved and also has to offer. We're the envy of the Lower Mainland. when I look at, I believe at 159, 160, 161, I look at what we're attempting to achieve in the next 4 years and next year. I think it'll blow some communities away. And we want the same level of service because our service levels are high. You know, if you go up to Maple Ridge, no disrespect to the mayor of Maple Ridge, but you play soccer in a rock pit or in clay. When you come to Richmond, you play at Hugh Boyd Park in an $11 million artificial turf. And it's nice and easy and dry, and you can play in any weather. We're talking about safety. It's a safety budget, Your Worship. We're putting tremendous efforts in climate change and moving up our 2040 flood protection. And we had an increased freshet this year. We've had high tides, over 16 feet. It was answered earlier that we were dealing with it. You know, tonight we talked about the libraries and what we're doing with the libraries. They've got a library program second to none in the province of British Columbia. You know, these are the aspects, and this is one of the reasons why we all live in Richmond. The budget satisfies all aspects of the circular city, and our strategic plan on page 200 for the future. I think if you look at that, there are 8 corollaries there, and this budget handles a long way. I would recognize the difficult times we're in, and I think staff have brought it. When you go at the global economy, you almost have World War III. Don't kid yourself, you got inflation going up to 8.8%. People are fighting, but we got to spend on it. We got the instability of the world, the growth, even in Richmond is growing, and yet other around us, it's slowing down. So the hard part of this is, to be honest, not only just the regular taxpayer, but is the business and industry. Business pays 3.2 times what the average taxpayer pays for the equivalent building. And industry does the same. They pay 40% of our taxes. It doesn't all go to the homeowner. Homeowner only pays 60% of the taxes in Richmond. I hope I'm correct. I think I'm close on that. And I see heads nodding. I mean, slam me if I'm not right, but I believe I'm right. And we're trying to, you know, the business industry paid over 45 million taxes. We've got people like YVR and the port that pay taxes. So we need to keep our staffing levels up. We need to keep and fill vacancies in QP and the outdoors. We've got our list of staff people that will take us through climate change and all the other things that we want to do to move forward. We've got to pay for it in some small way. And I think when people understand what we are doing, and I hope, Your Worship, as I said last time, when we say, if this passes and whatever, we put that in the tax letter that goes out, and we explain, as I've asked the same thing in terms of the utilities, why we've got now the flood reserve, et cetera. So with that, Your Worship, as mentioned, ECOM, for example, we want to be part of ECOM. We want 911. We want calls answered in less than 5 minutes or 3 minutes in order to get their request of the city. And Councillor Heed will be our new rep, has gone up 3 times. And that's just the facts of life to keep it going. And it's not just us, it's going up in every other community. We have the RCMP, we're all proud of the RCMP, our fire rescue, and having a safe community. So I think, Your Worship, I'd be nice to vote against this, to be honest, say, well, we only can go up 2 or 3%. However, when I look at what's in there and all the various things that we have and we can be blessed for, that I equate the $115 is probably modest. I don't think it was that high even or as high as last year. So we've dipped into the the reserves, I should say, the rate stabilization to bring it down. And we can do more if people want to, but I think we need to keep that because next year and the year after in the next 4 or 5 years, Metro Vancouver's increases in various utilities, et cetera, are going up between, correct me if I'm wrong, 12 to 23% in some areas. So we need to bring ourselves up to where hopefully next year's taxes in the 5-year, I think it is lower next year. And that was, your worship, what question what I was gonna ask. On that table, it showed that the taxes were going down overall. And I'd like to know how those were calculated. I'm glad to see that. This could be the penultimate year of where the highest of taxes. I forgot what page it's on, but you compared them over the,
Are you talking about the 5-year plan?
yeah, 5-year plan. It was a good projection, and I thank staff for it. If anybody can find it.
Pin 202.
202, yeah. And when I look at that, we're 588, next year 537, 348, 5 again, and then 492, so it's coming down. And obviously it gives us a chance to look at it with the new council to see where we can address those issues. So why the drastic drop?
Through your worship to Councillor McNulty, it's all based on the projections that we receive, whether it's contracts or the big one would be the RCMP. But it depends once we get the actuals, and of course we'll update, bring it forward.
Okay, thank you.
Okay, Councillor Hobbs.
Thank you, and through the chair. Well, first of all, again, to staff, thank you very much for a very thorough and detailed report. There's lots of information in here that people can refer to. Now we're looking at one of the recommended option of 5.88, and I think that's going to sound high to a lot of people. And I'm sure everybody would agree that we'd all like to see that recommended option being lower. But it is important, I think, just to mention a couple things, and I do have a couple questions too. When you look at the senior government payments, if I've jotted it down right, it's 1.51%, and to put it in my own language, those are things we do not have any option about. So if you can take that off the 5.88 right off the top. We have some costs that we've incurred to do with staff, which is 0.27. If you talk to a lot of people in Richmond, I hear lots of comments about us actually needing more staff. So I'm perfectly comfortable with adding on 0.27 for the commitments we've made, and the other approved commitments for council are 0.09. So the part that we actually control is relatively minor in the scope of things. And then you have the operational budget impact as well of 0.44%, which again is fairly small out of the 5.88 that we're talking about. And of course, we are going to be talking about the 1% to reserves, which I think when we talk about all the benefits that we derive from a healthy reserve fund, whether it's dedicated to one thing or another, or the rate stabilization fund, I think that has proven to be a very prudent investment, even though it does take a bit of a bite when you're talking about the tax increase. And I think it's important to point out as well that the rate stabilization contribution to the operating budget is 0.65, so taking 0.65 off of the increase. So we are using that. And this is all to accomplish the same level of service, which we have pegged at 3.22, which is amazing to me, actually, that in this era of inflation and high consumer price indexes, that we can have a budget increase of 3.22 to maintain the same level of service. So one question I do have about that is, if you look at one of the graphs, I think it's on page 178 maybe, yeah, 178, and it's figure 2. And if you look at the accumulated figures of the budget rate and compare that to the cumulative actual of the consumer price index, I mean, the consumer price index in yellow has gone up far more than our budget. So it's at 3.98 this year, actually, and we're still talking 3.22. So I have to ask the question, how is it that we can maintain the same level of service and yet be so far apart on those two numbers?
Through your worship to Councillor Hobbs, it's through the work of the senior management team, staff, and the CAO. We always look at the forecasted CPI, which it kind of puts us at a disadvantage when you see the actual. If you look at those years, the actual CPI is 8.9%, and the actual is 19.8, and the forecast was 8.9. So we've come in below that 8.9 to bring in the same level of service. So again, it involves hard decisions and things that some departments have to make with less. But we still find efficiencies, and whether it was like how Mr. Fangstead talked about savings through the telecom budget or through additional revenues, whether it's through permits, business license, some of the digitalization with the e-license and that, and future with the e-permit. So we're always looking at ways of being innovative and trying to bring down the cost without increasing taxes. So that's some of the challenges we've had. And as you mentioned, or Ms. Lusk mentioned, this year we're running at year-to-date 7.2% CPI. We had budgeted 2.3, so we're already 5%, running below and having the challenge to accommodate this year's budget.
That's right, and it's just worth noting for people who maybe are listening or watch this later, that 3.22 for maintaining the same level of service, which I haven't heard anybody in the community say that they want to decrease our level of service. So I'll keep an open mind in this discussion, but anybody who wants to vote no, or I'd be interested to hear what Plan B is to maintain our same level of service, or to hear what people are willing to cut. Because as I mentioned before, the municipal index is 4.75, right? And the Canadian board, I think, is 3.98. So we're significantly below that in terms of our same level of service. Now we have added a couple things on, and that will increase it, but from 3.22. So that was one question I had. And the other one is just a confirmation in reading the report, and I'm sure everybody read it, but again, it's good for the public to realize this. Out of our operating budget, about 85% is attributed to staff or labor, correct?
Through your worship to Councillor Hobbs, it's through labor and the RCMP and ECOM, so those are big drivers. And the labor, 80% of our labor is through collective agreements, union contracts.
Sure.
So really, there's not a lot of things we can do, non-discretionary increases, I guess.
Right, well, I'll just go out on a bit of a limb here and say from experience that when you're at that kind of range that we're at, that's actually very good. Because a lot of organizations, government especially, far exceed that. So I think people should realize that that's actually a pretty good number. Just one other question, Your Worship, is that one thing that I did notice, I think it's on F191 or page 17 of the report, and that's the insurance going up 34%. And I think that's another thing worth noting. A lot of those factors are perhaps beyond Richmond's control as well. If you want to look at climate change, or you want to look at wars happening in other parts of the world, hurricanes. So is there anything else to that, or is that just, again, beyond our control?
Through your worship, Councillor Hobbs, it is beyond our control because it's controlled by the insurance market, and also, with the disasters that the world has seen. So then their rates go up, passed on to the premiums, and through the premiums to policyholders. And then also through our building inventory, as our building inventory goes up, the values go up, they increase the rates based on the insurance coverage.
Yeah, I think even our net value is about 2.5 billion, isn't it? That's in the report, I think.
Yes.
Right. Okay, and just perhaps one last question for now. There's many assumptions built into all of this, predictions. We just heard about a couple of them. One of the predictions is on the tax revenue that we will acquire over the next 5 years. And I think on page Finance 201, it talks about the projected tax revenue. And so I'm just wondering, what are the chances, based on what's happened in the past, that we wouldn't meet those expectations? Because if we don't meet those predictions, it's back to the drawing board and another plan, right? So is that a fairly conservative projection? And does past history dictate that that is well within the range of what you'd reasonably expect?
Through the chair to Councillor Hobbs, it is a very conservative estimate. We try to true it up for the next year's taxes when we figure out new growth for the following year. But when you look at year 2, 3, 4, 5 in our estimate, those are very conservative estimates.
Sure. So I'll just wrap up with a comment through the chair. It's higher than anybody would want. We can all probably agree with that. But unless I hear some really compelling arguments or options, I will be supporting the recommendation. I've already outlined some of the numbers. I think that it's a very tough period of time we're in. We haven't seen inflation and indexes like this since probably the early 80s when it started dropping. So it's going to be a very challenging time. I think we could put things off for future years, but I think, as been mentioned by others, it's going to be very challenging over the next couple of years, and it's not entirely predictable. So thank you very much, and I look forward to hearing what others have to say.
Okay, Councillor Heed.
Thank you, Chair, and thanks to the staff for this particular report. I want to start out by referencing page 186 to look at that. I've got a few issues I'd like to raise, but I just want to tell you that I will be supporting the 5.88% tax increase going forward. And what I want to focus my questions on, and I'm glad the chief is online here, with respect to the RCMP and with ECOM, I think those are a couple areas that we need to be a little bit diligent going forward on. And my questions, as I was talking to the director here, is in reference to the 4 RCMP officers that proposed budget of $855,000 in 2023. I'm sure people around this table will recall in 2007 when there was a formula dedicated to identifying 4 officers needed for the River Rock Casino. I'm not sure whether in fact those officers are actually doing work specific to it, or this is just in the anticipated calls for service that may be required. We've just gone through the Calling Commission. We know some of the issues with respect to the casino. We know provincial enforcement bodies have been created, and they're dealing with a lot of the issues in and around the casino. But in particular, I want, if you go to 187, that we're looking at those 4 officer positions may be funded through taxation going forward. Now that's a prediction or something that due diligence is being done with respect to why we may have to take that out of taxation versus a casino revenue.
Your worship, to Councillor Heed, we made that statement in there because as over the past, I'm going to say 3 or 4 years, we've seen the casino revenue kind of flatten. However, the RCMP has, realized the RCMP costs increase beyond inflation. So at some point, we're going to have to move this probably into the tax base unless for some reason casino revenues increase. There's also other items that are funded by gaming that increase at CPI, which the casino doesn't, such as grants. So we're just seeing that, at some point, we're going to have to look at perhaps reallocating the funding for this.
I think we're going to, and thank you for the answer, I think we're going to have to be cognizant of the fact that this may be coming to us if there's increases in personnel that's required, that we may have to do that. The other one is with respect to, and maybe the chief can answer this, the anticipated vacancy rate within the members we have in Richmond Detachment. We've seen some of the stories out there, and we've seen some of the data out there with respect to about 20% here in E Division alone. If in fact we're dealing with a significant vacancy, whether it's through long-term disability or some other type of transfer somewhere else, are we still paying for those boxes we've created? Although, I hope I'm not asking a rhetorical question, I hope I'm wrong. Are we still paying for those boxes, although those positions are not filled?
Ms. Sham wants to answer that.
Yeah, through the chair to Councillor Heed, there is the authorized strength versus the actual strength. We are generally running about a 4 to 9% actual hard vacancy in the RCMP. And for the ones that go onto long-term disability, we pay a cost called divisional administration. So those people who are off on long-term disability, meaning medical leaves, parental leaves, that kind of stuff, is paid for by the RCMP directly through that cost that we pay for them, which then allowed the city to utilize the funding that we wouldn't be paying for that to backfill those positions. So that's how we keep our relative strength quite high and the cost relatively lower. So we are not carrying that cost. We pay for diff admin, and part of the diff admin goes to those long-term positions.
Thank you. With respect to backfilling those positions, we are paying for that backfill, is that correct?
Correct.
So I just don't understand how the cost saving would be there if we're paying for the box, paying for a divisional, assignment, and then having to backfill it.
Through the chair to Councillor Heat, the cost for the divisional administration is relatively low. So I will have to double check the cost, but it's about like $15,000 per officer. That is, $3,500 per officer. So that is a relatively low amount of money. If you look at that cost and our salary cost per officer, there's a huge differential for that. So, because we pay for the diff admin, we have a lot of our salary that we haven't expended on an annual basis, even when we have the officers away on long-term disability.
My question in regard to this before I move on is the fact that the RCMP contract increases 7.06% for 2023. We understand that. We understand collective agreements and all of that. The point I want to make here is total vacancies or total people that we have actually on leave within our organization. Mayor, I don't know if we want to comment on that in an open meeting or we want to move that to a closed meeting, but that's my question. Whether we're looking at 20% vacancy, you mentioned 4% possibly, and we cover for that, but on the total vacancy, whether it's long-term leave, whether it's parental, whether it's WCB, or whether it's clear vacancy.
Well, are you looking for the budgetary implication of that?
Correct.
Okay, can staff comment on that?
Through your worship, Councillor Heat, we budget for the budget includes the full complement. However, just for some information, because you weren't here in previous councils, that there is a gapping for vacancies that is built into this budget permanently. 11 positions we've gap funded for the vacancies. So we believe, and Mr. Sham can comment, that we take into account sufficient budget for those hard vacancies.
Yeah, through the chair to Councillor Heat again, we run actual real vacancy is in the 4 to 9% range. Is much lower than, for the provincial governments running, for example, on a much higher range. Part of it is because Richmond is considered a employer of choice even within the RCMP, so we don't have the same challenges as some other municipal forces or other RCMP forces when we get vacancies for people to come and fill in. So hence our actual vacancy rate generally is much lower than comparable police forces.
But I don't have that exact number, Your Worship.
Well, we'll ask staff to provide the number. It may be in a confidential email, or a confidential memo. We'll just see how it works out.
I'll just move on to ECOM and make a comment with respect to this. Councillor McNulty, who sat on the ECOM board, and I have had conversations on this. ECOM increase of $1 million for 2023 for us is just, incredible. And the comment I want to make there is the due diligence has to be done with respect to what ECOM is set to do, what it was meant to do, and how it can deliver a sustainable service to Richmond. So those are certainly issues that we need to pay particular attention going forward on, but I will be supporting this budget. Thank you, Mayor.
Okay, Councillor Liu.
Thank you, Worship. Thank you to staff
I really appreciate the setup of this operating budget report, the way that it's done. I know, I know you've taken on a very different approach from other years as how you're presenting it to us. And I would direct people to look at Fin 219. Starting with attachment 6, you can see what our actual budget is. So the total operating expenses are going to be $319 million. The revenue looking to be $373 million. And then you can go through each of the different items, community safety, where our revenues are coming from, where the labor is coming from, contract services, so the contract services, the RCMP that we're looking at. Moving on, community services, what that looks like, what the revenues are for that. And so you can see what's working, supporting each one of those things, if you will. Oh, so engineering and public works, the revenue, I'm imagining, some of that is DCCs, those kind of the fees that people are paying. Is that correct?
These are.
Like when I go to attachment 6 on Fin 222?
These revenues are, I believe, service fees.
Service fees, so they're the service fees that people are paying if they're.
Yes.
Yes. And so we can sort of see what each department does. Obviously, finance and corporate services, you guys don't have a whole lot of opportunity to make money elsewhere. And same thing with corporate administration, very little. Planning and development though, money comes in into our planning department and that kind of thing. So when I do look at Fin 225, the planning and development, that's where we're looking to add some of those positions for poverty reduction, the rec fee subsidy, and the social equity positions that are fleshed out more on Fin 235. That would be the budget that those jobs are going into because they're planning and development positions. Is that correct?
Through your worship to Councillor Liu, I believe you're talking about Fin 233, some of the building approval, building energy specialist, the building approvals code engineer.
No.
Transportation.
No, I'm looking at 235. Emerging organizational additional levels recommended for funding in 223. Item number 2, planning and development services, community social development planner 2.
That's right.
Okay, so those ones are going into, that would then belong on the Fin 225 budget, is that correct?
Yeah.
Is that where they're landing?
Yes, through your worship to Councillor Liu, that is correct. Those positions will become part of the planning and development division if they are approved.
Okay, so we're looking at quite a number of people adding into those social and development jobs. When we look at, say, spending $190,000 on the recreation fee subsidy program, how much is the program itself? Like, how much money are they dealing with? Do we know what our, does anyone know what the?
We have an answer from.
Yeah, through the chair to Councillor Liu, I would have to go and pull some stats to give you a dollar value of the equivalency of those programs. I don't have those numbers off the top of my head. What I can tell you is that we are back to pre-pandemic levels and over pre-pandemic levels in terms of the number of clients that we have registered within the recreation fee subsidy, and we are seeing good uptake on the program overall, but I could report back with a memo with some more detailed information.
Okay, thank you, because it would be nice to understand that if we're investing in $190,000 in wages for people, that it's well above and beyond that what we're actually investing into the recreation fee subsidy for the users, the user groups.
Through your worship to Councillor Liu, it's important to note that these two positions regarding recreation and fee subsidy program are moving two programs or two positions that we've been asking on an annual basis as a one-time additional level. We are now asking for these positions to be ongoing additional levels. So it's not additional staff. They have been funded in the past, but we've been asking it on an annual basis. So because the program is continuing to grow and we're seeing more people participate in the program, we want to ensure that we've got those staff secured for the program.
Okay, thank you.
All right, we'll go to Councillor Au.
Your Worship, I will be voting against option 2. I would prefer to go to option 1 for the reason that this is a difficult year for everybody. We all know that. And the inflation is already making people living in very high stress. And I don't think we should do more than 4.98% of increase. Now, I understand that basically the major problem of our current budget is that the RCMP costs. And in my opinion, I think we made the mistake 2 years ago to have the additional RCMP office employed. We know that this is coming. We know that the cost is not going to be recovered by the federal government, but we still went ahead to increase the hiring. So I think we have to set a limit for the tax increase to the level that people can accept and afford. Now, I'm sorry that I only have the access to the internet for 5 minutes. So I indicate that I will vote against option 2.
All right. Councillor Wolf.
Thank you, Your Worship. I'll try and be less than 5 minutes. So I had a couple questions. One was related to option 1 that Councillor Au was just referring to. So my question there, and I do know it does have a couple of paragraphs describing the estimated OBI impact of Capstan and the Steveston Community Center. I think it was on our back a little bit. It was one more over. Oh, there it is on FIN 197. And I know on there it does mention that this is for facility and related programming. But knowing that these facilities are not up and running right now, and people in Richmond would probably like to see money from their taxes go to programming now, as opposed to stockpiling it and saving it, and then providing the programs. Could staff comment on the statement here, which somewhere said, if we don't do it now, it's going to cost more later. So it's not that the overall cost is going to be more later, it's just that we're deferring it.
Through your worship, Councillor Wolf, that's correct. We believe that it's more prudent to set aside lower amount. It's similar to the rate stabilization, just averaging out over a longer period rather than having it all come at once in year 4. And we know there's some other things coming down the road that will impact taxes at a bigger amount. So we know that these 2 facilities have been approved. So we thought, let's get it into the budget and make sure it's funded for the opening.
Thank you. Follow up on that through your worship to staff is, so the money being set aside will not actually be used to hire any staff until the facility is up. Okay, thanks. So then in that aspect, I do, I'm still leaning between options 1 and 2, but that is a bit more, that I think we could put those costs over, because there are members throughout the rest of the city that aren't adjacent to the Capstan or Steveston who would see this impact as being a bit more than perhaps they feel they should be taking on. Albeit many will use the Canada Line or use the facilities once they're built, and the programming as well. My next comment question was tacking on to the back here. I appreciate the no tax impact positions. We did discuss that at length with the utility budgets. But on page 233, the sustainability specialists and energy specialists, great. I would say we should be funding those types of things, but it's great we found a source for them. Next one I wanted to mention is kind of well, I'll just mention it now. I am in support of the Steveston outdoor pool, our expansion. I won't comment on it later, but I was going to ask for that to be added as well. I guess my last question to staff relates to the community social development planner or leader positions. So I know in the emerging organizational additional levels, one of those is recommended, and then 3 are not. So my kind of 2-part question is, like I did on the last item, how will we not like lose the work that staff have done to like say, you know, we need these, but maybe we'll get them in the next budget? Like, can you confirm that they're around for that? And also, why did we pick the one that we did and not one of the others? Because when I read the one on page 237, the bottom one there, it sounds like that would be the one that's addressing Richmond's most vulnerable residents. And we just had a presentation at the last council meeting addressing the people living in the worst situations. And perhaps staff can just highlight maybe the position that you are recommending will do that as well in the interim. So that's my question.
Kim?
Through your worship to Councillor Wolf, the positions that we identified in the budget to move forward as recommended were ones that council had recognized the need for support with the poverty reduction plan. We are seeing an increase with vulnerable populations in poverty. That's an area that is growing significantly that needs extra assistance. In terms of social equity, that's another area that we are seeing that we really need to focus on in terms of how we are helping other departments really understand the impacts of social equity within our community and how we are planning for the social equity principles within our strategies and plans and our policies as we're moving forward to ensure that, you know, what we are planning is equitable for the community. The recreation fee subsidy program we talked about, that is an existing program that is growing, that is seeing significant increase in participation following the pandemic. In terms of the positions that were not recommended, they are still very important. They are areas that we are seeing work that is needed from the department to respond to social issues. As you're probably all aware, we regularly have community delegations with regards to social issues. We know that during the pandemic, there's been significant impacts on vulnerable populations, and there continues to be those increases. We're seeing it in poverty, we're seeing it in anti-racism, we're seeing it in homelessness, we're seeing it in affordable housing. The area within community social development is growing significantly, and those demands on the city and on the department is growing. These roles here have been filled by gap funding within the division to support, in the past, to support the work that is happening. We will continue to try and support those on a yearly basis, but these positions are not permanent positions. So there is that vulnerability that is there, but we will work to try and ensure that that is covered. The work that we are also trying to do ensures that we then have to look at how we reallocate resources or also look at what we can respond to within the resources that we have.
Thank you. One just short follow-up question, if I may, through your worship. Of the three listed on that page, is there one that's a higher priority?
Of these three, I would say that the Community Social Development Planner 1 is a position because it supports across the department to respond to social issues.
Thank you. Then in my final comments, no other questions to staff. At this stage, I am leaning towards option 1. I'm aware that the impact on the rate stabilization is there, which I don't like to be putting cost for future residents to pay. So that aspect of it, I don't really like as much in option 1. But what I do like is the impact of the OBI from Capstan and the community center. And also I do have support, like I mentioned, for Steve Outdoor Pool, but I would also like council to consider making it a permanent position, as was just highlighted, the Community Social Development Planner 1. Thank you.
Councillor Day.
Yeah, I would also be voting for option 1 with some changes. I think that the social planner number 1 on Fin 237, if there was ever a time, it's now to hire that social planner to help, as it says in the report, Richmond's most vulnerable. I was at Caring Place yesterday and saw hundreds of people lined up for that free Christmas gifts, but I'll get into that later. The other reason I think we should go with number 1, because on Fin 202 is the 5-year budget tax increases. And if you read along, it basically is quite stabilized for the next 4 years to come. And this is the year that we've got the highest tax increase of 3.22 plus the other ones. And then after this, it's 2.78, 2.71. So we can easily go with option 1 and we'll be in good shape. Option 1 allows for 4.98% instead of 5.88%. And I just think that's far more palatable. We also have in our uncommitted reserve account, and on this one here, on all 3 options, there's 1% going to transfer to reserves. Well, the reserves is well over $1 billion, but the uncommitted amount, according to Mr. Chong, is $71.4 million. So I don't see why we couldn't reduce that to maybe 0.75 or and then that would reduce it the amount that would allow for this Fin 237 social planner 1 position, and obviously for the pool to stay open at Steveston. It's only $37,000. So a couple of minor changes, but I think we're really close.
I just want to note, when we're talking about those items on 237, you've already got in the additional levels that are recommended, you've got number 2, which is a Community Social Development Planner 2 for poverty reduction. And you've also got the Community Social Development Social Equity Coordinator as number 4. So from my point of view, that's plenty in that area. I mean, there'll never be enough, but that's all we can have this year, as far as I'm concerned. Yes, Jerry?
Yes, Your Worship, I just want to point out to Councillor Day that if we choose option 1, then that 5-year on Fin 202, because it's only a deferral, so then that 5.37 is going to be over 6% next year. So the more rate stabilization you choose in a year, it just comes back. You're just pushing it down the road. Yeah. So that's why staff have chosen option 2.
Councillor Gillanders.
Thank you. I have okay, I have a question about our comparison with other municipalities on Fin 177. Where we fit in there between Burnaby and Surrey. This is for 2022. Do we have any idea where we fall, where we're gonna fall in 2023? Have any other municipalities done their budgets yet, or are we all doing it this week?
Through Your Worship, Councillor Gillanders, we just know that Vancouver has provided a draft budget. However, they haven't included some of the community safety obligations that they said they're going to do, so we don't have any indication at this point, and Surrey has some challenges too. So.
Yeah, so you've seen draft budgets from some of them?
They have
or
not
only
shared
those 2?
anything with us.
Okay. And then I just want to make a comment about the flood protection. I know that we've been doing all of this ourselves and take a lot of pride in protecting our residents and coping with climate change and protecting us from the future. I've just been hearing about there's been talk of just, with the flood that we just had out in the valley, that really flood protection could be federal and provincial government funded upgrades. I'm just wondering if has there been any talk of that, or any word about how that might roll out in the future?
Who's going to take that? Yes, sir.
Thank you, Worship. Through you, Mr. Chair, to Councillor Gillanders. Yes, We have been very successful to date, accessing grant funding from senior levels of government. We think they could do a lot more, so we are continually pressing them. The province is currently conducting a strategization exercise that's being accelerated in response to the atmospheric river we had last year. So certainly the feedback we're giving to them, and there'll be a future report to council on this, includes a lot of requests for additional dedicated funding over the long term. So that's certainly a part of the plan.
Great, thank you. On Fin 180, just looking at the whole thing and what the impact would be on a average residential property, the $115 on a $1.183 million home. Does that go up dollar for dollar, just based on the value of the home, whether it's a condo or a house? Or so if it was a $2.2 million home, it would be twice the amount? Or is it a different scale?
Through the chair to Councillor Galanders, it could be. I believe it does, yes.
Yeah. Okay. And then also for industrial commercial properties, is it just based on value of the property, or is the rate slightly different for commercial properties?
Through the chair to Councillor Galanders, it's based on the assessment value and the tax rate or the mill rates calculated for each class of properties. So if you're talking about commercial industrial, you're looking at approximately $364 for each 1% of tax increase, and $119 or $120 for each 1% of tax increase.
Okay, so do we have any information on what that would cost, like an average? I mean, I guess we just have such a huge range of businesses and sizes and
That
sizes
will
of
come in
properties.
due course, once this work is done.
Yeah.
More or less finalized, then staff will bring us back a report which shows for each class of property, whether it's agricultural or commercial or industrial or residential or whatever, it will show a rate.
Okay.
And from there, that information can be deduced.
Okay. Yeah, and then looking at the rate stabilization, looking at the options, I mean, it would sound nice to go to option one, but I also see like that the 0.65% of rate stabilization is equivalent to $2.863 million on Fin 198. So it takes out a good chunk of our RSA balance as it is. So I hear what staff is saying about that would cause the rates in subsequent years to go up. I think that with the 7% increase to the RCMP budget, that we came in pretty good considering such high inflation. So I think I'm gonna go with option two.
All right, okay, there's nobody else. Let's bring this to a head. My suggestion, I've heard no negative comments and a number of positive comments about this increased operating hours for Stevenson Outdoor Pool. 26,009, budget impact of 0.01%. So my suggestion is we put on the floor the staff recommendation, and B would be increase very slightly by 0.01% in that 26,000. Otherwise, it would be as staff recommends. Now, I understand there's going to be councillors are going to want to make further amendments, but that one seems fairly clear, okay? So I'll move it with that change. So that's moved and seconded, plus the 0.01. Now, so the motion, I'm sorry? Okay, well, speak to anything you want in the whole thing. Go ahead.
Okay, well, I know we did hear from a lot of people that they do want to use the pool more. The pool hours were such that last year that the public swim was 6 a.m. to 7 a.m. And so I went a number of times at the 6 a.m. slot, and quite a number of times there were fewer than 6 people in the pool. So I don't necessarily know that while I appreciate you opening the pool more for me, I don't know that that was the best use of it, and maybe when staff works with the community groups and the swim club, maybe jigging the hours amongst who gets the different times will work it out better for people and result in better allocation of the times, but I didn't find that having public access at 6 AM was necessarily that big of an uptake on it, and certainly if it was raining, there was only 3 of us in the pool, so there's that.
Well, maybe we could ask staff for some kind of a memo talking about the pool usage, if this goes through with that 0.01% added. And so we can make sure that we're getting the optimal use. All right, just a minute, there was somebody wanting to speak. Did you want to speak to that?
If I could speak to that, through you, Mayor Brody, to Councillor Liu. Certainly this allocation was, and the ask for increased money is mostly about funding the early opening in May and the hours into September. And on an annual basis, the staff work closely with the Aquatic Advisory Board to tweak the schedule. And we could certainly take that 6 AM comment under advisement as we look forward to the 2023 operating season. But it is primarily about extending that overall season.
All right, so if we could get, once you've kind of finalized it, just give us a memo on that. We have Councillor Hobbs.
Thanks, and through the chair. So just to clarify, that has been added on to the main motion now?
Yes.
Okay.
So B includes the extra 0.01%.
Yeah, I'm not in favor of it, actually. Our family is full of swimmers and use the pool all the time. And there's plenty of opportunity to swim lengths, not just at Stevenson, but at other pools too. And although it's a small amount of money, if I look at, what also wasn't included, if I look at, for instance, the fire services and a training position, I'd probably rank that higher, and they're both around 0.01 of the budget. So there's lots of things that weren't included in the budget. Matter of principle, I'd have to be really convinced that something is crucial to add anything onto the 5.88. So I wouldn't be in favor of doing that.
You want to move amendment then? To take it out?
Well, I think it'd be a little cleaner. I will move an amendment to take it out because I think it would be cleaner to deal with it separately in my own mind, but I could be wrong.
That is dealing with it separately.
Yeah, the amendment to take it out?
Yeah.
Yeah, I would move that.
You moving it?
Yeah.
Someone seconding it? No seconder.
Okay. Anyway, that's it. I think that adding on anything is not what I want to do right now unless there's an offset. And there are other things that weren't included as well. For instance, like the fire rescue training. Thank you.
All right. So we are on the entire budget as recommended, plus that 0.01. We're not on an amendment. We are on the entire budget. What is? I'm sorry. There was just an amendment to take out that 0.01.
But first there was an amendment to add it. So I thought we
No,
were-
it was moved adding it. That's why I explained. I added it in because I thought everybody was in favor. Nobody spoke against it, so we put it in, and that's what's on the floor. Councillor Hobbs moved to take it out, and there was no seconder. So it is as originally moved. Now, yes, with the 0.01 added in. Now, was there something else? You have the floor.
Me? Oh, I just wanted to ask a question about what the great success was in the trial for the outdoor pool. I just wanted to hear because Councillor Liu was saying there was only 6 people there in the morning, but the report says due to its success, a permanent increase in the hours is recommended. So I just wanted to know what
Maybe we could ask staff to give us a memo before we go to council next week.
Okay.
Explaining more about it and giving us some good background on it. Councillor Day.
Yes, I have a question of staff. So if we go with option 2 and we add the $27,000 pool on FIN 238, and we add the social planner number 1 on FIN 237, what would we have to reduce the 1% to reserves? If we added those two little wee items, what could we reduce the capital, sorry. Transfer to reserves, like if we, because what I'm thinking, I guess I'm thinking option one, which should be 4.98%, and then reducing or adding to the 1% transfer to reserves, those two items, FIN 237, the social planner for the Richmond's most vulnerable, and adding FIN 238, 27,000 to increase the weeks that the pool would be open. So it's kind of a math question. So could we do one with adding to the transfer? You understand what I mean? What do you think?
We would have to do, you'd have to tell us exactly for each component of the budget, you would have to say what you wanted,
Okay, so
you know, what you want the revised figures.
So I'd like to add whatever we already have, the 27,000 on FIN 238 for increasing the pool weeks that it's open.
That's already there.
It's already there, and so we add that, and then we add FIN 237, Social Planner 1 for Richmond's most vulnerable at 150K. So I think that we are in a critical situation, and that position would be extremely valuable, and if not now, when? But then if we go with option one, we would have an extra almost 1% to work with. So what would we come in at?
Through your worship to Councillor Day, I believe you're asking to reduce the 1% to fund these additional levels. So you're talking about 0.07%. Works out to approximately 177,000. I believe on a increase, it's probably, I'm guessing, less than $1 a year.
Yeah. So to add those two, social, benefits would be very insignificant.
Starting from option one, which is not on the floor.
Yeah, well.
So what you need to go through is the entire number, the entire components of this operating budget that is on the floor, and tell me how those figures are going to change.
Okay, so so option two, adding those two additional items, but then in order to bring the tax down, I'd like to reduce the transfer to reserves.
Okay, so just a minute. So we've got, so you want to add this,
FIN 237, Social Planner 1, $150,350.
okay, so you want to add that. What else do you want to add?
Well, what's already on there, which is the pool.
Well, that's already there.
Yeah. That's it. So that's it. So really, I'm adding, Councillor McNulty wants to add the pool hours, and I want to add the social planner. So what does that take us to? And then whatever that takes us to, I'd like to reduce the transfer to reserves so that it comes out even.
Like 5.02%.
Yeah, exactly. So it'll be nothing. So instead of 1% to transfer reserves, it might be 0.98%. To bring
Why don't
that.
we start off, why don't you make a motion to add the 150?
I make the motion to add the 150 for the social planner 1 for Richmond's.
And that would be to the, let's see, the one-time levels, right? Where are we?
It's FIN 237.
Yes, I know. Okay, just my operative budget. Next, totally open. It's been a long day. Okay, so that would be to add the 150 to the additional levels, which is B. Right?
I think so.
Okay, so that's, you're moving that amendment, and it's seconded. Okay, we are now on the amendment to add 150, the 150 to subparagraph B.
Yeah.
Okay, who would like to speak to that? Councillor Wolf.
As I mentioned, before, same comments. Just will also be in support of making the minor adjustment to fund this if need be, but even if it weren't funded through a change in the transfer to reserves, I still would make this the priority one change to what's on the floor. Thanks.
Councillor Hobbs.
Thank you, through the chair. It's not that that isn't a good thing to have, on staff, but we are talking about a 5.88% increase already. And one of the things as we go through each year, it's at those times during all our meetings that you say yes or no. And we say yes a lot to a lot of different things. We've said yes, as the chair has already pointed out, to a couple other positions and funding issues when it comes to social policy and social planning. So it's not that it's not a good thing. It's just that we're talking about adding on $150,000 and perhaps changing the amount that goes to the reserve after that. And I think it's about 0.06. And as a matter of principle, when it comes to a budget increase that's already at 5.88%, it's not that it's not a good thing, but we've already added on in this area with this budget, a couple positions. And so I won't be supporting an additional $150,000 to the budget with this amendment. Thank you.
Councillor Liu.
Thank you, Worship. And
on the amendment.
On the amendment, we talk a lot about serving Richmond's most vulnerable people. This role is currently an auxiliary planning assistant role without base funding, so there is already somebody doing this work. But what we sometimes forget about is we just approved 4 other roles that are still working on poverty reduction, the rec fee subsidies, and social equity. So we're already doing a lot of work around this. And part of that, or the big piece of that, is to prevent people from becoming our most vulnerable. And within that, we need to make sure that we're putting aside our 1% so that we can build the facilities. We have places for them to go to have those rec fees. Where are you spending that recreation fee subsidy if not in your pools, your community centers, your lawn bowling club, your other places like that? So if you don't build those places by putting aside your 1%, then you're not going to get there. I'm not going to support this one because we already have this job happening right now. And my goal is to stop producing Richmond's most vulnerable people. It's to prevent that by having these other roles and by doing the other work that's available to us.
Councillor Day on the amendment.
Yeah, I think this is a really important position. I was at Caring Place on Saturday and saw hundreds of people lined up. And you know what? They didn't look that vulnerable, but they're the Richmond's working poor. And it broke my heart. And they're out there every single Saturday to get that $50 card from Save on Foods. There's a whole segment of this population that is underserved right now. And the only way we can help them is if we have this exact position. And, it's just not good enough, guys. I mean, there are people that are working 2 and 3 jobs and they need help. And that's what this position will help to focus on, because it'll, as it said, that the position will play a key role in supporting the development and implementation of new social development strategy. That's important. And I don't think it'll cost us a penny, because if I can convince you to just take another 0.002% away from the reserves, which already has $71.4 million, we can actually make a difference for people today. And so we don't have to go higher than 5.88%. Maybe we can even go lower if there's an appetite. But I really think that we need to get out there. We don't want to end up like Vancouver and have people camped on Hastings Street, whatever that, maybe it ends up being in front of City Hall. If we don't help them now, it's gonna cost us later. So I look at this as a cost saving, not a $150,000 bill.
This is a position that's already filled.
And
So how is it going to prevent us from becoming Vancouver? I don't get that at all. Councillor Glanders.
Thank you, Your Worship. I don't completely understand the difference between it being currently served and the benefit to making it permanent. But it's on here for a reason. It's not recommended for funding now, but it's something that's being considered. I really, by the principle of equity, in these tough times and with inflation and everything else, we're recommending our usual transferring the 1% to our reserves, because we build beautiful facilities and we've got amazing, infrastructure and facilities that we're all proud of, but the majority of the people that those facilities serve are people that are doing well. And I hear what Councilor Liu is saying, that anybody can use the facilities, and that's fair. But I don't see, it seems like it's a lot easier to keep spending money on the things we're used to spending it on. But to add this 175K on and then just take, I think it was probably 0.02% off of the transfer, just makes it a little more equitable and shows that we're taking some real action to address our poverty in our community. So I think we could stay at the 5.88% and just lower the transfer to reserves to 0.98, if that's what the number is, just based on the estimation there, and add the 150. And then it just shows that we're willing to share some of that massive equity we have with everybody in a more aggressive way.
The additional levels also, as I state, it already calls for a social development planner too. And it also calls for a community social development, social equity coordinator to address exactly what we're talking about. So I think that those two positions, plus that third position, which is, we already have someone doing it, albeit on an auxiliary basis, fulfills any given need. All right, I'm going to call the question on the amendment. Those in favor? Those opposed? So it is defeated with Councilors McNulty, Liu, Hobbs, Heed, and the mayor opposed. No. Was there anything else? Okay, so I'm going to call the question on the main motion, which is option 2. The only change then that's been made is to add this 0.01% for the pool, which was in the original motion that I made. I'm going to call the question. All those in favor? Those opposed? It is carried with Councilors Day and Wolf opposed. I'm sorry?
He's in China.
Yes.
No, I just meant he's not here.
Yeah, he said he only had 5 minutes of internet left. Okay, someone move adjournment.
Move adjournment.
Okay, we're now adjourned, and I'll call the closed